Welcome everybody to the NICU Dad Podcast. This is our first ever video podcast episode, but I want to welcome today's guest, Wes Brandon. And Wes, man, thanks for being here and sharing your story. It's an incredible story. I can't wait for everybody to hear it. Um, but yeah, man, let's just get it started. On here, really want the details. Like, don't spare any details. Don't worry about rushing or anything like that. Like, let's, man, as long as it takes to tell your story, let's do it. And really want you to share all the details because I think that's the important part, especially for other NICU dads that might have been in the same situation or something similar. Um, I think the details are the most important part. But yeah, just start us from the beginning, man.
Yeah, so I was in the NICU with my kid for 2.5 months about, and 2 months of that I spent as a widowed dad. I was, by myself in there. Not, I had family around, in and out, but you know what I mean. You're pretty much alone there, especially not having my wife there. Um, that's the bombshell story. Anybody that looks me up is gonna find something like the dude is widowed at 23 with a NICU baby, kind of something along those terms is gonna come up, right? That was in 2019. So I'm 7 years out now, almost really close to 7 years out. That was end of March of 2019 when my son was born. And remarried now, have a couple more kids. We'll get into that whole journey potentially. And now doing all this, like wrote a book, speaking, doing coaching widow debt, like all this other stuff. And that's, we got connected to each other. I'm excited for some of the stuff that we'll be able to help with dads. Who knows where that's going to take us, but that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so my wife was diagnosed with incompetent cervix, which at the time when the when she told me that, I'm like, what the hell does that even mean?
Yeah.
Like that doesn't even sound like a medical diagnosis. That just sounds like a judgment call, on what your cervix is capable of. But yeah, so I had to, all of these medical terms are getting explained to me during this whole process, and I'm like blue in the face because I don't know what any of this stuff means. You know, at the time I had a sales job. I was selling mechanical engineering software, so that's the only language that I spoke was that stuff. And but incompetent cervix is basically she dilated but didn't go into labor, and this happened at 25 weeks. She was a pharmacy tech, a retail, and this happened in just north of Dallas. My son was delivered in Baylor Scott and White in McKinney, and shout out to that whole NICU team because they were phenomenal. I would go back there in a heartbeat. I don't know if everybody's still there. I know some of them still are because I've talked to a handful of them, but um, yeah. So she's working at her retail pharmacy tech job and goes to the bathroom, just feels like there's something falling out. So she calls her obstetrician, and obstetrician tells her, hey, you need to go to the ER, get a pelvic exam, make sure everything's okay. And so she goes up to the hospital where her OB is going to deliver. It's a little further away from our house, about 45 minutes. We were in the colony. And she gets up there and they diagnose her with said incompetent cervix and say, hey, you're too far along to do a cerclage, at least by their judgment. And you're going to be on bed rest here. So you don't get to go anywhere anymore. You're stuck here until baby comes. So that could be tomorrow or that could be 2 months from now, like however long you can hold him in, right? The longer the better. Um, so they got her hooked up to an IV on betamethasol to kick his lungs into gear. And luckily it worked. She held him in for another week. And our routine then, so she's up there 24/7, and I'm home. We got dogs. I got stuff I got to take care of. And so I'm doing the whole like working from home, doing everything around the house, go run up and, spend some time with my wife while she's up there. And then one morning I'm working from home and she calls me and says, hey, they just came in, did another pelvic exam, and he's coming out breech. And they said they're going to do a C-section and they're not waiting for you. You need to get your butt up here. And so I hauled ass up there. I was driving an old 97 Dodge diesel pickup, but then I topped it out on the freeway going up there and got up to the hospital. And by that point, I had a good relationship with a lot of the L&D nurses that were taking care of her, because you consistently have the same little small cohort of nurses that are with you. And so I went up there looking for one particular nurse in general that I knew was going to be like the charge nurse up there at the time. And I go in, and it was so weird because I come bursting through into labor and delivery, and there wasn't a soul anywhere. Like no nurses were at the waiting station. No, like you could hear a pin drop. There's nothing going on in there. And logically, I knew she wouldn't be in her room because they're going to be doing this, but I didn't know where else to go. So I went and looked in her room. Did they leave me a note or something? Nothing. So I'm looking around, wondering what the hell. And finally, that nurse, she comes around the corner down the hallways, and she yells at me. She's like, "Wes, this way!" And she just like points like this down the hall. And so I run down there, and we get out right to the doors of the OR where she is, and put me in a little space in between where they scrub you up. And she just tells me, she's like, "All right, stand with your feet apart and your arms out and shut up." It's like literally what she said. She's like, "Stand like this and shut up." I'm like, okay. They scrub me all up and go in there. And I got into the room with not very long to spare, maybe a minute or two before they pulled my son Vance out. And he was 1 pound, 13 ounces,
Okay.
which is,
Pause right there. I want to pause right there at the ER, the OR room. So I want to go back real quick because I have some
yeah,
questions.
let's do it.
So she called you. Well, one, I didn't experience the wife on bed rest. Like our stories are so similar, man. And that was one of the reasons why it just even connected with me even more. Um,
Hmm.
with possible incompetent cervix, all that stuff. So she called you and told you to come down. What were you thinking when that phone call came in?
Well, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this. So this is one of the reasons why I was excited to do this episode because nobody asks me that. You know, nobody asks me that.
Yeah.
I've told this story a bunch of times. I've told it on stage a number of times and done plenty of podcasts, and nobody asks that. Um, but God, I put myself back in those shoes. So the phone call that changed my life kind of happened twice,
Okay.
right? Because the first one was from my wife when she was at work, and she's like, "Hey, something's not right. I'm gonna call." So then there was like that whole like I'm at work and I'm like, "Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit!" Like waiting, like, do I leave? Do I stay here? Now I'm kind of useless at work because I'm mentally checked out. I can't focus here. And so then she calls and says, "Hey, the OB just wants me to go get checked out. I'm gonna run up to the ER. We're not worried about anything. She just wants to make sure we're okay." So then, that whole time I'm like trying to make phone calls and set up appointments, and I'm like can't even hold a conversation. And then she calls and gives me the update of the said encounter. She says, "They say I can't leave." And I'm like, "What? You can't leave? Like, what do you mean you can't leave?" They're like, "No, like I can't. I'm on the bed right now. I can't even get up to go to the bathroom. They're putting a catheter in me." I'm like, "Well, oh, okay, hold on. So where's your car? Like all this, like where
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
everything?"
Yeah. Make it
So
make sense.
now I've got to like logistically figure out what the hell is going on and fix all that. And and quickly get into like a quick new routine, which that week was rough, especially for my wife. Like mentally, she's stuck on bed rest, and she was a she she valued her privacy. So then being told that she now has to use the bathroom in a pan and let somebody else take care of that was like that she had to wrap her head around that, and that was rough for her. She didn't want anybody in the room and anything, like understandably so. Like I get that.
Yeah.
But then me as dad is like, she's kind of having a hard time mentally with this, and I'm trying to support her while also knowing I have to go home. I got to take care of stuff. I got to, we got animals. I also have work. That's the other thing I'm sure we're going to get into is like PTO, like maternity or paternity leave, PT, all that shit. Yeah, no, that not a thing,
Yeah.
you know.
What is
Um,
that? Yeah.
yeah, what is, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
So trying to balance that, I'm like, shit, I have to be working enough to, all this stuff that I'm trying to balance and while trying to keep my wife's sanity intact. So that week was a hard one, but then when she gives me the other phone call, the real dropper, like, "Oh, it's happening now." Um, That one was just kind of a full-blown panic. I'm like, I have no idea what my kid's going to be like. By then we've had a week to kind of them preparing us for what the potential is. Like when baby comes, you're going to be in the NICU because
Yeah.
yeah, it could go full term like this, but that's really unlikely. You're probably going to end up in the NICU. And when it happens, we're going to be testing for all these things. And they were good about telling me like, what's probably going to happen.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
but I've also heard that that's not the case a lot of times. That's why like
Yeah.
I my the nurses where I was at, I learned were pretty damn good, and I was blessed with where I was at. But they had me pretty well prepared of like as far as baby's concerned. Like the focus was always on baby and a little bit on mom, but like what can happen with baby? What do we focus on here? So then when I get this call, that's kind of playing in my head. I'm like, okay, that he's coming and they're gonna have to do a bunch of tests and test for all this stuff. Like some babies have this. And then of course that whole week I'm like Googling stuff, you know, all these different what happens in NICU babies, what kind of things happen and reading all like these worst case scenarios and working myself into a tizzy about it. And so then all that's like playing in my head, you know. And so I get the phone call and I hop in the truck and I'm just flooring it because I don't really know what else to do. I want to be there for the birth of my kid. I gotta figure out what's going on. But the whole time I'm driving there, I'm also thinking like, there's not a damn thing I can do once I get there. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna get there and watch, you know. But my wife needs me, so I'm gonna go be there for my wife. And yeah, I guess that's kind of where my thoughts were at while I was driving. I was like hoping I don't get pulled over because
Yeah.
my truck topped out at like 96, but I luckily I didn't get pulled over or anything up there. But yeah, and then like running into the NICU, I'm just like, my kid's being born, So there was also a lot of excitement there. I was like, this is cool. Like you know, I've always wanted to be a dad. Like there's all these dreams and aspirations that are kind of coming to in this moment. So it's a ton of hope, a ton of positivity, but then a whole crap load of what ifs, like, that are
Yeah.
just whirling in your head. So
It almost sounds impossible. Like, to
yeah,
imagine that, like, how can you be excited and scared shitless, at the same time?
yeah.
Like,
And
yeah.
what's funny is I haven't spent a lot of energy thinking about what that was feeling like at the time, what I was thinking about until I'm like, it's even hard to like bring a lot of that back. I can remember it, but it was so much that like you can't manufacture that,
Yeah.
you know. You can't you can't do that.
One of the spots, and I mean that's why I asked that question, is I think that's a highlight that gets missed all the time because that is literally where our lives changed. Is that phone call. Whether it's that first one or that second one, but it's the phone call. And then the other part for me is that drive to the hospital, that car ride. It's like nothing else. Like you can't describe it. And
Yeah.
I mean, if you really dig down deep and really think about that car ride, like one, you're by yourself.
Mm,
You have this news, and it kind of almost always seems to be the same way for everybody, for all the NICU dads, is you're by yourself. You got this call, and then you're literally dealing with unimaginable thoughts, unimaginable emotions. Like it's I know where my mind went when I mean that ride for me, I was making all kinds of deals. I was literally it was a thing where I was like, man, I swear to God, just please don't let me lose my family. Like I will be a better person. I will do this. I will do that. Like I was
yeah.
it was a lot of deal making. I don't
Yeah.
know if you
I
experienced
remember
it.
some of that too. I wasn't too worried about Lauren because everything looked good. My wife looked good, and they're just like, hey, the baby's just falling out. So I was mostly worried about the baby.
Yeah.
The C-section thing kind of threw me for a loop. We didn't talk a whole lot about C-section. But I had family members who had had C-sections and they all went fine. So I didn't have a ton of anxiety around that. I knew that they knew what they were doing with that. Um, but yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, you say that I do remember being scared out of my mind for my kid,
Yeah.
you know, because I also hadn't had any really like experiences with him yet. He wasn't big enough for me to feel him on the outside at that point. So I still have a whole lot of questions about like what he's even like, or I mean, not that you can tell even before they're born anyway, but that's kind of where my head's at.
Yeah.
Like I have no idea who my son is, and I really want to get to know him, but I'm afraid that I might not be able to, like, because those what ifs. I'm like, if he comes too early, we're talking like, what's the earliest that you could realistically save a baby and not have too many complications? And we're
Yeah.
like, we're right in that
Yeah.
line, we're right there. So yeah, I remember thinking that and praying. And I do remember praying on the way up there, just like, just let him be okay, let him be okay, let him be okay, like all the way up there. Like, yeah, yeah, it's been a long time since I thought of that, man. That was a heavy one.
Yeah. I'll just let you sit in there with it for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah, I know exactly.
The I think the craziest time was for me, I think the car ride, I was driving so fast, trying not to crash, that I was at least halfway mentally occupied with that. And I think about the time when it really just sat and I just had nothing but the full weight of the situation hit me was after they pull him out, they wrap him in plastic wrap, stick the little CPAP on his, and I get some good news in that, they're doing tests and stuff. I'm like looking over the nurse's shoulders. I'm like, what's going on, And this nurse, member is an Indian lady, and I still have pictures of her talking to me about this. And she's telling me, she's like, your son looks good. He's actually, he can breathe on his own, which is kind of the miracle they're hoping for. He didn't need to be
Wow.
intubated.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the betamethasol they gave him worked at least to that extent. And basically all he needed was the reminder to breathe. That's why they would give him the CPAP. So she's giving me that good. She's like, this looks really good. He can breathe on his own, but there's all this other stuff we need to figure out. So we're gonna wheel him over to the NICU and other place. We're gonna start doing some tests and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, let's go. And she's like, no, no, no. There's no let's in this. That's we're gonna take the kid and you're gonna stay right here. Right. So then it was that kind of window when my wife is still high as a kite from the drugs they have her on for the C-section. She can barely think straight. She's saying hilarious things. And so I leave the room while the they're getting her stitched back up, and I'm talking with the nurse, and then they wheel him away. And then I'm at that moment when I was kind of left like, okay, my wife's getting, they're like, hey, we're gonna patch your wife up and then we'll wheel her out here. You can hang out with her. It was that time in between where I didn't have anything else to do except just stand there. Where I'm like, I don't even know where the NICU is.
Yeah.
Like where are they taking the kid? And so then all this stuff. So then that's when all the thoughts, like all the worst case scenarios, start playing out of my head. I'm like, what happens if this? What is this? And all these things that I had been looking up. I'm like, I hope that doesn't happen. And that was the heavy moment. For those, it wasn't very long. It was maybe, dude, I don't even want to put a time limit on because I don't remember. Timelines during that time are just a blur. It could have been 20 minutes, it could have been 3 hours, and I won't remember how long it was. But that limbo time there, that was the worst for me.
Yeah. Where you actually got to think. Yeah,
Yeah.
the distractions were a little bit less, and you actually got to focus on the moment. And
Yeah, yeah. I had just enough information to where I'm like, okay, he's alive, he's okay. Um, Now what?
yeah,
That was the whole like, I don't like the now what. That's what's freaking me out is
yeah, it
now
sounds like
what?
almost being on bed rest might have been a small blessing in the fact that you had the opportunity to get educated a little bit
Yeah,
on
there was
what
a little bit of
on the might
education, yeah.
be's and the NICU and that type of stuff. Yeah. So,
To be honest, there's another thing since we're talking about NICU dads. 95% of all that communication was directed towards my wife because she's
okay.
up there,
Yeah.
right? So what I'm learning is I'm getting third party through my wife because she's up there 24/7. So she's always talking to the nurses, asking all the questions. So she's learning all of this, And then I'm working all day and take care of stuff. Then I just come up there for a couple hours at nighttime before I got to go back home. So then I go, I'm like, yeah, talk to the wife, hey, what's going on? How you feeling? What's the update? And then this is where she gets to, this is everything I learned today. She gets to like vomit all that out and teach me what the nurses have been talking to her, and then maybe I can ask a couple questions, but it's still all, coming through her.
Yeah.
Nothing was ever told to me directly. A couple things, but mostly not.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So there was no pulling you aside and setting you up and, hey, dad, this is
No,
what might
they
happen.
did they did really, really good at making sure my wife was aware, comfortable, like they did good with her, and then it was just by osmosis through her that I was figuring it all out.
So running into the hospital, C-section, emergency C-section, baby was breech. Um, Same story on my end. We got the same thing. So baby goes to the NICU. Wife is healing and or in recovery, right?
hmm
Um, what happens next for you guys?
Um, I re remember one of the funny questions was after we get the baby all hauled off, and then wife gets all stitched up, and she kind of comes down off of her drugs, and she's acting a little bit more normal, and they get the tests all done, and we get Vance back in our little NICU room, and finally they come like test results, they look good, like we don't see anything abnormal for him. He's literally just too small. He can't hold his body temperature, his oxygen, or eat on his own. We just have to wait for those things. So it was very, very encouraging news. I felt really good about him at that point. All the news was looking good, luckily, because I know that's not always the case. You know, we were very lucky with him. Um, but then the funny part was these nurses come in and they rip my wife's shirt off, and I'm like, "What the freak are you doing?" Like they didn't tell me what they were doing. They're like, "We're getting colostrum." I'm like, "What the hell is colostrum?" You know, like I don't know what you're talking about. I'm 23 years old. Nobody's ever taught me any of this before.
Yeah.
So then it was a lot of this, like they would just come in and start doing stuff, and I'm like, can someone keep me in the loop, please, of what's going on? That was the next thing. So then my wife was basically the one. She's like, "Chill, babe. Like this is." She's like coaching me through what the nurses are helping
Yeah.
her with, and I'm kind of standing in the back corner, like, okay, like, do you want me to take pictures? Like, what do you what do you want me to do? You know, and just kind of feeling like I'm just like stuck on the back of the wall over here, just trying to learn or whatever I can during the process. And she got colostrum going, and they started getting in little tubes, And what was really cool is they started collecting some colostrum, and then they handed it to me. I'm like, "All right, Dad, you want to go feed your baby?" And I was like, "Wait, really?" They're like, "Yeah, like this is liquid gold, man. Let's go give it." I was like, "All right, cool." So that was like, I was getting like feel good, And so then we go in the NICU, and in the NICU room, separate from where my wife was at, and the nurse in there, they're hooking everything up, and I walk in there. I was like, "I'm told I'm supposed to give these to you," and then the nurse is like, "Oh, here it is. Yeah, let me show you." So that whole like first experience was pretty cool. It was special for me
Yeah.
but it's separate from mom because mom's still in a completely different room. So I'm going in there. It's only me for the first, I don't know, couple. I think she was discharged from her recovery from getting stitched up and everything like a day and a half later or something like that.
Yeah.
Just the
Yeah.
first day was just me with my kid, and kind of going back and forth with, do I spend time with my kid or do I spend time with my wife, kind of thing. And but that little time where I got to spend with him was kind of cool, And then when my wife got in there, it was probably partially because I did it, but the focus definitely shifted to my wife, Now, okay, mom's here, we can really get started,
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah. It's
And then
funny
I,
you
I kind
describe
of
it that
stepped
way.
back.
Yeah. It's almost that way where they're like, all right, now we can start for real. Like, let's let the NICU time
Yeah,
start for
that's
real. Mom's here.
which
Yeah.
at the time I was, thinking about it now, I'm like, I would definitely do that differently now. If I was having, for example, my wife now is pregnant with our fourth kid, including Vance, her third. And I mean, God forbid if we end up in the NICU again, I'm going to go about that very differently now. I'm going to be way more involved and not be a jerk about anything, but I'm going to be very assertive. Like, no, I'm involved in this.
Yeah. Yeah.
This isn't my
It's a
first
team.
rodeo kind of a thing. Yeah, it's
Yeah. You
teamwork
see,
here.
yeah, you see where the value is of being a team
Yeah.
member on the care
But I
team.
also think like part of that was just like me growing up kind of culturally expecting that was my job, was to shut up
Yeah.
and stand in the corner.
Yeah.
You know, we always like, remember my grandpa would joke about stuff like that. As far as it comes to the baby, she's like, we weren't even allowed in the room. Like, you're lucky you get to be in the room, kind of a thing, and just how we grow up. Like, we're not involved. Like,
Yeah.
we're supposed to be over there, and let mom handle it and just do what she tells us to.
Yeah. And there's definitely
Luckily,
been a
that's
culture change.
changing.
Yeah,
But
it's been a culture change even on just being dads.
yeah,
I think that the type of fathers that we are now, for a lot of us, are completely different than how we were raised, or how our fathers were raised. We just seem to be more involved in everything. So there's definitely been a culture change. I always talk about, dads used to sitting in the lobby smoking cigars. They weren't even in the labor room and delivery
yeah.
room, but that's a long time ago. You know what I mean? And now you have, I mean, dads are, stay-at-home dads. They're
Mhm.
super involved. Um, so you guys go in, she gets discharged from recovery, and you kind of already, I mean, he was born at 25 weeks, right?
26.
26
She went
weeks.
in at 25. Yeah, and then
Okay.
had him at
Okay.
26.
So, you see how he's doing. How long before you guys got in your rhythm? I mean, and so what was that first week like for you guys being in the NICU?
Um, God, it was such a massive change because like a whole new routine. It just blows your old routine out of the water. But becoming a first-time parent kind of does that anyways.
Oh yeah.
Regardless of whether you're in the NICU or not. But um, I was still working. I didn't take any time off except for like the couple of days. And then I was like, I'm burning through my PTO here. I gotta get back to work. And so my wife we'd just be at home and she would take it easy and do a little bit of cleaning here and there, and I would work kind of my 8 hours from home. Luckily, I at least didn't have to go into the office, which was further away. They let me work from home during that time. But then it would just be me work, and then I would finish working. We'd kind of make some dinner, eat some dinner. Maybe we'd grab something on the way up to the hospital, and then we would just go up to the NICU, and my wife would do as much kangaroo care as they would let her do. And I would sit in that rocking chair over there the whole time, and then I would even do some little extra work because I was in sales, so I'd like, I don't really know what else to do, so I'll like shoot some emails, I'll do some of this stuff, try to make myself feel productive because I don't know what else to do. I'm
Yeah.
just here for kind of moral support. And then they would have me hold him a couple times. There's a couple like, hey, Dad, you want to do some skin to skin with him? I'm like, sure. And to be honest, the first time I was like, this is weird. I never like, the first time doing that was funky for me. I'm like, I have to take my shirt off in front of all these women staring at me. Like I didn't realize I was that insecure about my body until they asked me to take
Yeah.
my shirt off, you
Oh
know?
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And
I
so
need
then
to shave.
yeah, your personal boundaries that go out the window when you're in the
Yeah.
NICU for a while. And yeah, so then I did skin to skin contact with him a couple of times. But for the most part, I was like, no, mom should get that. Mom needs that.
Yeah.
Mom needs to bond with baby. Eventually, maybe she'll be able to breastfeed, so she needs to be with baby as much as possible. And the nurses didn't really argue with that, but they're like, you should, you can try it too. It's fun. You should do it. It was at that time that I learned. It was amazing to me how perfectly regulated his body temperature would be when they pulled him off of my wife
Yeah.
and they put him back in the incubator and he's like 98 degrees on the dot. And then the couple times that I held him, the nurses would come in and look and they'd feel, they're like, okay, we're gonna pull him off you now. I'm like, why? They're like, he just needs to come off you now. I'm like, okay. And then they put him in the incubator and he's like 102. He's cooking the port. I've got him roasting so warm. He's nice and cozy with dad. But
Yeah.
yeah, I remember that was a cool thing. I didn't expect. I'm like, that's cool. That's crazy. And then my wife's parents were in the area too, so then they would come. And when my mother-in-law would hold him, same thing, you know. And the one or two times that my father-in-law held him the same way, same as me. Like he'd be toasty coming off of him. So our bodies, they don't know what the hell they're doing with regulating
Yeah.
babies'
Yeah.
body temperatures, you know. But that
Well,
was
that's
one of the
pretty good.
fun things I do have a fond memory of was looking at that. And the nurse kind of she's like, yeah, he's pretty toasty. Check this out when we hook him up, and it's just over 100 degrees, something like that. I was like, good night. Okay, yeah,
So what was that like for you as far as did you feel anything those first couple of times of doing skin to skin? Like, and I don't mean like, what was that? I'm not talking about special holding your son, but just like physically, did you feel anything or, those first couple of times of doing skin to skin?
I guess expound on what you mean if I felt anything a little more.
Well, so when I did skin to skin, um, man, it calmed me down like nothing else. Like it was, I
Okay, I
struggled
see
to
what you mean.
stay awake. Like it was just, and especially, I mean, later on, the more I did it and everything, it just seemed to take all the pressure away. The first couple of times were kind of weird. Exactly your same experience where I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
what am I doing? Thank God I had a tank top. They slid her
Yeah,
under my tank top,
yeah,
and it was really cool. But I know, as it went on, I'm like, okay, I like this because I like the way I feel when I do this. And
hmm
it just seemed to take that for whatever that time was that I was doing skin to skin, it seemed to take all the stresses kind of away a little bit, and so that was
yeah,
one of the things that I don't know if you felt that in the beginning, the early stages or later on, but um,
yeah. So my experience with that, I mean, you know the story, so we'll get to that point of it.
yeah,
But
yeah,
that shifted, that changed a little bit. Um, but initially, I only held him a couple of times.
yeah.
The first couple of times I was super weirded out. I was all like, "Am I doing this right? Am I gonna crush him? Am I gonna,
Oh
all
yeah,
these kind of questions that I'm thinking." And I remember the thing that would drive me nuts is his tiny little fingers. He would wrap them in my chest hairs and like pull them, and it tickled so bad. I'm like, dude, stop. Like, that, knock that off. But yeah, I think I got to do it maybe 3 or 4 times um,
okay,
before before the next portion of the story. And by probably the very last time was when I think I related more to what you're doing. I was like, yeah, I'm good to do that,
yeah,
And I do remember passing out in that chair and taking a nap with him on me, and the nurse having to come take him off me. So
yeah.
yeah,
So
I do remember that.
so we have first week in the NICU, second week in the NICU, right?
Yeah.
And usually I think, after first week is always the hardest for most of us. Um, then that second week, hard but not as hard. Um, and then we kind of find our groove. But were you guys in that spot, or
We kind of hit this weird little bump. I don't know about halfway through or something where first I realized I'm like I don't know what's going on with my head right now because my wife was gung ho to get up there and be with her kid like the moment I got done working, you know. But after a few days of that, I I hated myself for this for a while. I got a little bit burnt out with it. Don't know why. I have an idea why now. We'll talk about it a little bit later. Um, but I was like, do we have to go right this second? Like, can we like eat some dinner first and have this like big old argument about that? That there's this, wife has this connection with my baby that I don't yet. I'm still working on that. Is where I think that was. But yeah, about halfway through there was kind of that little. I wouldn't even call it a rough spot. It was more like I don't know. It wasn't a fight. Wasn't really an argument. It was just a. She was getting frustrated with me that I wasn't wanting to like get in the car and floor it every single day that I was done. I was that way for a couple of days, but then I think kind of as I got in the groove, I'm like in my head, I'm like he's fine. Like he'll be there when we get there. Like we can take our time, And she just wanted to get up there super super fast because she loved the kid to death. I did too, but not to her level. I hadn't had the chance to have the experiences that she had had yet. Um, but yeah, by the time we kind of got into our groove, that second week was more like. I don't know, we just hit a routine of like every day we do the same things at the same time, and we go up there and we would get there, shoot immediately, do skin to skin contact, put him back down, and then the nurses would ask me if I wanted to eventually, and sometimes I would say yes, sometimes I would say no, I'm good, and then just hang out there until I'm so freaking mentally exhausted with this whole process that I'm passing out in the chair at like 6 p.m., 7 p.m. and just wanting to go
Yeah.
to bed. But also having this weird like feeling guilty about that in myself. I'm like, I do remember like wondering why I don't feel the same way that my wife does. And that was like eating at me, you know. But I wasn't
Yeah.
saying anything about it. And nobody was asking me either, you know. Nobody's asking me how I was thinking, how I was feeling. My wife was getting mental health checkups like every other day. They come and like, hey, how are you doing with have you had any over, like, have you been feeling super sad or have you had thoughts of maybe harming yourself or anything? Do a quick little check in with her. And I never even gave it a second thought that nobody asked me because I was used to not being asked, I guess. That's just
Yeah.
normal. I didn't even think about it. Um, but maybe if they did, I would have said something. I don't even know if I would have said something. I probably would have just said I'm fine. But, you know, yeah, then everything changed about 2 weeks into that. Oh. Then, yeah, when everything really blew up was the couple days leading up to this. My wife was having shortness of breath, where she thought she was having anxiety. I thought it was too. She's on anxiety medication even before she got pregnant. It's just something that she dealt with. And given the situation, she thinks she's having anxiety. I wasn't second guessing it. I'm having anxiety over here.
Yeah.
And but I remember a couple of particular times we'd get out of the car and we'd walk up to the hospital. We'd only get halfway through the parking lot, and she'd have to sit down on one of the benches outside of the hospital and like catch her breath again. She's like, "Holy cow!" She kept joking. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I got fat. I was pregnant or something. Like, I can't breathe." And I remember mentioning it to some of the nurses. I'm like, "She's just having a hard time breathing. I think she's having some anxiety or something. Like, should we get anything checked out?" I remember asking somebody about that, and they're like, she seems fine." Everybody's like, "Nah," and even Lauren's like, "I'm fine." Kind of brushing it off. Um, but then one morning, so this was my son was born March 29th in the mid morning sometime. And then this was April 11th, about 2 weeks later. And we're at home again. I'm working in the morning, and my wife has another one of these kind of shortness of breath episodes where she thinks she's having a little bit of a panic attack or a mild something like that. So I'm working in my office, and she just, calls over to me. She's like, "Hey, I just want you to come help me calm down, rub my shoulder or something like that." And so I go sit by her on the couch and talking to her, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm just having a hard time breathing for whatever reason." And I'm like, "Well, you feel okay?" She's like, "I think I'm okay, but I think I'm gonna go take a shower. It'll help calm down, cool off a little bit because I'm also feeling all clammy and sweaty. Like there's all these other symptoms going on or picking up on. And so then she goes into the bathroom, like, okay, and I go back into my office and I sit down at my computer, basically just like this, and I'm about to get ready working when all of a sudden I just get this heavy feeling like I wanted to be with my wife, like I needed to go be with her for whatever reason. And I can't really describe exactly what that felt like, but it was just this overwhelming feeling like I wanted to be with her for whatever reason. I'm like, I remember looking over at my wall. I'm like, she, all right. Well, so then I get up and I walk into the master bathroom where she's at, and she's throwing up. I'm like, geez, okay. And she starts throwing up, as soon as I get in there. And she's like, "I don't know what's going on. I feel like crap. I feel sick." She's breathing super heavy. And so I'm there trying to calm her down. I was like, "Okay." I'm holding her hair and stuff. And she's like, this feels really weird. I think you need to call 911. And I brush it off at first. I was like, "No, like you've been thrown up during pregnancy. You're going to be fine, you know?" So I didn't do it at first. And she keeps dry heaving, throwing up like it's bad. I'm like, this is kind of crazy. And then she says again, she's like, "I think you need to call 911. This is crazy." So I'm like, okay, whatever. I call 911 and I'm kind of describing to the operator what's going on. And she finally stops throwing up. I'm like, let's get you over to the shower, get some cool water on you because she's feeling hot. And so she's like, okay. And I'm like helping her. She's feeling really weak, and I'm trying to kind of walk her over there a little bit while the phone is sitting over on the bathtub, and I'm like talking to the 911 operator what's going on. And in the middle of her asking me questions, my wife just kind of collapses in my arms, and I kind of half catch her so she doesn't fall onto the floor and roll over, and her face is just purple, and she's not looking at anything. And I lost my shit. I freaked out. I'm like, what is going on? And so then I'm like screaming at the 911 operator. I was like, she just went purple. She just collapsed on me. She's purple. Like, what is going on? And the 911 operator, she's like, you need to do CPR right now. And I was a Boy Scout. I'd been trained in CPR, so I started going. But I tell you what, I went way too damn fast, you know, freaking out. And the lady on the 911 dispatcher lady, she's counting, but like yelling at me, counting like one, two. She's like, you have to go with me. And I'm sobbing through this whole thing and just looking at my wife's face as I'm doing CPR on my own wife. And the only thing I'll say is I have not seen any movie that does it any justice what it looks like when you asphyxiate. It's not a good sight. Stuff that your body does when it happens is gross. And so I'm doing CPR on her for a while, and then finally the 911 operator says EMTs are showing up right now. You need to go let him in. And my dog was in the room with us as well. And I come to find out later, dogs can have PTSD too, because he was never the same after that. And so I had to put him away and open the door, lead the EMTs in there, and they take care of her and put her on the stretcher. And they got this machine that's doing CPR for him. Excuse me, machine that's doing CPR for him. And I remember watching the machine do CPR and just thinking, I'm like, okay, if that's how deep you're supposed to go, I did not do it right. I
Yeah.
didn't go hard enough or something. So then I was like, shit. I don't know if I hope I didn't just kill my wife by not doing that right. There's one of the million other thoughts that's going on in my head. But the weird thing that happened, and I remember even in the middle of that, recognizing that it was happening, was EMTs showed up and they come in the room, and all of a sudden, all of this crazy anxiety, this super adrenaline I was feeling, all of a sudden I felt totally calm and like extremely aware of everything that's going on. I remember I stepped into the bathtub and it almost felt like it wasn't like an out of body experience, but it was like suddenly I just felt different. And I was just, the best word I can describe is I was just super calm, like unnaturally calm about everything. And just watching the EMTs do this, and they asked me a couple of questions of what happened, and then they pick her up and haul her off. And there's a bunch of other people wearing fire safety shirts coming in there. And then they haul her off. And I had called my mother-in-law as well, and told them that what was going on. They needed to get here. And so they were on their way. And then they take my wife off, and one of the EMTs tells me, he says, hey, we're gonna go lights and sirens to Plano Presbyterian, and you're not gonna follow us. Like, we don't need you to get in a car accident and have two people we need to take care of. Don't follow us. When you get to the ER, they'll be aware that you're coming, and they'll show you where to go when you get there. I was like, okay, cool, whatever, let's go. And then I get stopped by, I think the fire chief, I think, showed up. And he's like, tell me what happened. Tell me the whole story. Okay. And even during that time, I was super, super calm, and I relayed everything in crazy amount of detail of exactly what happened. He's got his little notepad. He's writing some stuff down. He's like, okay. Then a police officer shows up. Tell me what happened. And I got to tell the whole story over again to like four different people, which now in hindsight, I understand why they do that. So they make sure they get all the details of what happened in case there's any foul play or anything like that, right?
Yeah.
But I had to tell the story four different times before anybody would let me leave my damn house. And then finally, they're like, okay. Like we've got what we need here. And I just left everybody in my house and my dog was locked up in my office. And me and my in-laws hopped in. We just booked it out of there. And I don't even know if they locked up when they left. Like we just left them there, and got up to the hospital. And then, got like 18 hours later, I was signing organ donation papers, man. I showed up to the hospital. They stuck us in a waiting room, said, we're still doing CPR on her. And I immediately knew when they said that. I'm like, nope, that ain't good. That's way too long to be doing CPR for now. 20 minutes since I started it. And eventually they did get a pulse back. Very, very weak, but with the amount of drugs they had in her, she should have been going 300 beats a minute. And we're just waiting and praying for a miracle that whole day. And that whole day was filled with some other kind of uncanny timing things too, of people that I can like. For example, I served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints when I was 18, between 18 and 20, and dedicated 2 years of my life basically selling Jesus was kind of the joke that I give, and um, very very dedicated to that while I was doing it. And one of the guys that I was paired up with there, still a good buddy of mine, out of nowhere, he just got this feeling he needed to call me. I hadn't talked to him in like a year. And out of nowhere, he called me while I was sitting next to my wife's bed, holding her hand, hoping she'd wake up. And he called me. I'm like, what is, I almost didn't answer it, but and I answered. He's like, hey man, I don't really know why, but I just had this overwhelming urge. I need to call you and see how you're doing. I'm like, I'm so sorry you got that feeling because here it comes. I'm about to drop this bomb on you. And told him what's going on. And then he told some other people that I knew well, and kind of spread the word a little bit. But just little things like that, like kind of out of nowhere. And um, there was a there was a guy locally in our area that went to the same church that we did, but in a different building, that had been waiting for a kidney for a long time. And I've since talked to him and got his side of the story too, and got his permission to tell theirs. And anyway, they've been waiting for a kidney for a long time. By the time it got to the point that we knew like she ain't gonna make it, and I talked to our church home leader people and told them what's going on, and they came up to the hospital. They're like, obviously we hope that you get a miracle and she pulls through, but just in case, because you're her husband, you can facilitate giving this guy that we know a priority if it's a match. I mean, it's a slim chance for it to be a match, but if it happens, then there's a route that you can go with these forms. You can direct it to him. So I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Like, let's do it. And I signed those papers, and I found out the next day that it was a perfect match. And
Wow.
he got the kidney that he was looking for, and he's still doing great to this day, 7 years later. I talked to him on the phone about 6 months ago for a while, and it's been great. So there were miracles that came out of that, you know. Um, but I struggled with that for a long time. Of like, why did they get the miracle and I didn't? Like,
Yeah.
seriously, And so I had a lot to work through as far as that's concerned. And then coming back to the NICU after all that happened was like, I I let my wife go officially from the operating room where they were going to do the harvesting. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning the next morning. So technically her date of death is April 12th, but is April 11th really. And let her go. And then after that, I distinctly remember um, telling her goodbye and kissing her on the forehead. And the surgeons were all there, garbed up, looking at me. I'm like, I would hate to be one of those surgeons watching me do that, and then tell them like, all right, you can pull it. And then I had to walk out of that room, and as the door shut, I just watched them shut, and the last thing I saw was my wife's face as the they pulled it and her pulse stopped. And then I just turned around and I don't know how I didn't break my hand, but I punched that cinder block wall in that hallway as hard as I could, and I just let out the loudest F bomb. I wanted everybody in that hospital to hear it. And I just punched it, and then I just stood there. Like I cried for a second. I got a little bit teary-eyed, but then I was like, shit, now I don't know what the hell to do now. And I knew my parents were waiting out in the lobby, and there were some other people out there, but I didn't really want to go out there either. But I knew I couldn't stand there. I definitely didn't want to be standing out there while I knew they were going to be taking organs out of my wife. So I was like, all right, I guess I'll walk down this hallway, and that was a long walk, man. That was a hell of a long walk. And finally got down out the end of there and came through the doors into the lobby. My parents were waiting for me. And they're like, well, what do you want to do? I was like, I want to go hold my son. That's what I want to do. I want to go hold my kid. And so we got in the car at 2:30 in the morning, and my parents drove me up to the other hospital, up to Baylor Scott and White, 45 minutes away. That one might have actually been closer to an hour, depending. Well, no, it was middle of the night. There was no traffic. It was probably 45 minutes. And get up to the NICU, and then, I mean, good grief, I feel bad for the nurses when I had to drop that because they're used to our routine at that point. All the
Yeah.
nurses are in there. Like we get
What
there
are you
about 6:30 every day to hang out with the kid, and so then
what are you doing here?
that's exactly what they said. So I came in there, the little buzzer, they don't just let anybody in there. You got to go and you got the little camera, so I go up there and hit the buzzer. And at that point, they recognized us. They just opened the door, they didn't even ask anymore. But then I came in there and hit the buzzer, and then the door opened, and one of the nurses just came walking down the hallway. She's like, "Is everything okay?" And she could tell it wasn't, you know. And she's like, "Oh no. Like what's happened? Where's Lauren? Like why is she not?" And I didn't say anything. I just walked past her, and my mom had to break the news to the nurse. And so then the nurse starts just sobbing, and she has to go tell some of the other nurses. And that was like the whole department just like, holy shit, you know, like, can't believe that just happened. So then it was I don't really know how they were handling all that on the outside because they just shut the door and just let us be. Nurse came in and like, what do you need? You need a blanket. You need like, you tell me you need a drink. Make sure I'm comfortable. And I just told him, I was like, I just need to hold my kid. So I went in there and I pulled my shirt off and I just sat in the chair. And then the nurse, got Vance all prepped and she brought him over and set him on me. And I says, I might be here for a minute. And so I'd like some pillows if you could get them for me. And so she went and got me a bunch of pillows and got me all propped up and ready to go. And then I just want to go to sleep. Like, I don't want to think about this right now. So that's all I tried to do. I just tried to go to sleep. And I couldn't go to sleep for a minute. Um, but I remember I was like, I don't want to think about anything else. I'm just going to try to just focus on my kid, you know, like listen to his breathing. That was what I was focused on, was listening to the little CPAP machine that was pushing
Gotcha.
air in and out. That's all I could focus on, was that little sound, a little gurgling that the water's making, from the CPAP machine. And eventually I fell asleep. I don't know when, but I passed out at some point and then woke up again probably an hour or two later. And I remember uh getting back home. We got home just as the sun was just starting to make light across the horizon. So it was probably like, I don't know, 6 in the morning or something like that in April, whatever time that happens. And yeah, I woke up and just like, I'm, I feel like absolute dog shit right now. And now I'm sore because this chair is super uncomfortable and I hurt everywhere now. You know what I'm talking about. And so we just decided to drive home. And my parents still had their suitcases in the car and everything. And because my parents had showed up that day, they were planning to fly down. So they just happened to be flying down the exact same day all that happened. So they could be there with me. Like, that's another one of those kind of uncanny timing
Wow,
things that,
that's
you know,
crazy.
they had bought those tickets a couple weeks ago when everything went down. And anyway, so they drove us back to the house, and um, I hadn't really cried a whole lot yet. But pulling up in the back seat of my wife's car and looking at my house, looking at the front door, walking up those steps, and suddenly it hit me like she's not in there, and I collapsed right there on like the walkway up to my steps, and had a little kind of mini break right there. And my dad had to pick me up and get me to come inside, and then I kind of gathered myself a little bit and came back inside, and I don't know why, but I set my stuff down. I walked right back into that master bathroom because um, some friends of ours that had asked us if we could do anything. It wasn't pretty in that bathroom, you
Yeah.
know. There was a mess, and I had asked somebody. I was like, "This is gonna be. I hate to ask you this, but it's a mess over there, and somebody could really clean that up." So I guess I kind of want to see how that went or something. But when I walked back into that master bathroom, I freaking lost it. And where everything happened. And I curled up in the fetal position on the tile floor of that bathroom, and I just screamed and cried for I don't know how long. And we've got a mini documentary coming out probably later this year that my mom's going to tell her side of that story with that of a mother having to hear her son
Hmm.
sound like that. I I can't imagine having to listen to my kid do that. But yeah, that was the worst day of my life, man.
Damn.
And then just went to bed, slept, I don't know how long, pretty much all day. And then the whole journey of like now I'm balancing like I feel this obligation to go up to the NICU and spend time with my kid, but now I've got like the medical examiners calling me in the coroner's office, and then I got to plan this funeral, and we're doing this like memorial service, and there's all these people coming to like, it was a freaking madhouse for a while, and planned out planned out the funeral, planned out this a separate memorial. We had the funeral back in Utah where our families were at. We had a memorial service at our church there in Texas, and dealing with all that kind of stuff. And I found myself just distracting myself with as much as I could, you know. And there for
Well,
the first little bit, there's so many people, but eventually everybody has to leave, and then it's just me and my kid.
yeah. So let's pause there because I have a question for you, and this is going to sound weird. It sounds weird asking. Um, so going back to that day, that night, and you saying you wanted to. I have two questions. First, this one: when you were on your way to the NICU after that night, what was that car ride like? I take it you weren't driving.
No, I wasn't. Um, yeah, I was in the back seat. We drove my wife's car up there. My parents were in the front seats. And God, by that point I was so emotionally spent and mentally spent. I was exhausted. Um, I don't even remember what I was thinking, dude. I don't even think of I was thinking very much.
Hmm.
I was pretty numb.
Yeah, yeah,
Numb was probably the best word for it.
yeah,
The only thing that I do remember feeling was like I want to be with my son because it's the closest thing I have to her.
yeah,
Like I feel like that's where she's gonna be,
yeah.
you know?
Almost like when you were saying you want to go hold your son, you were saying you wanted to go hold your wife.
That yeah, 100%. Yeah.
I hear you. So my second question, um, what was that calm in that bathroom that you were feeling? Have you thought about it or any
I
idea?
have thought about that. Um, I haven't asked some like professionals about I've talked to my therapist about it a little bit. But it was some type of acute adrenaline spike where it's like everything goes in like crazy fight or flight mode, where I kind of became a passenger to my own body. And I've read books on this. I've studied. I did a lot of training with firearms since that time, and did defensive firearms training and talk about when when you're in a life-threatening scenario, like what your brain does, and reading books on that. And there's actually a book by Gavin DeGraw called The Gift of Fear that I got a lot out of for this. Talked about how acutely aware your subconscious mind is of things when you're in a situation like that. And I just kind of got put in this mental place where I had absolutely no control over myself, but I was extremely aware of what was going on. But like when and where I decided to move somewhere and do something, I wasn't making any decisions. A completely different section of my brain had taken over, you
Yeah,
know?
like a safety disconnect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And almost like some type of a dissociation
yeah,
happened there,
yeah,
you know? But what was so weird was I was aware of it when I was in it, but I had no control over it.
yeah.
And I've never experienced that ever since then. But I've talked to people who have been in some crazy life-threatening scenarios, getting attacked or something like that, and they describe something very, very similar, where they're like, all of a sudden, just things went on some kind of weird autopilot, and I could see everything happening, and I was like, almost like cheering myself on to get out of the scenario, kind of weird stuff, you know. Mine's obviously very different. I wasn't in some type of a self-defense scenario kind of a thing, but it was a whatever my brain was doing sounds very, very similar. That I just became
Yeah.
a passenger to my own body.
Super high level trauma. Um, so after that day you went and held him. How long would it be before you went back?
I think we went back every day.
Okay.
My parents were there too. You know, they wanted to go get some time with my son. Um,
I
yeah,
mean,
I
that's
remember going back. I remember going back the next day. Because walking, I remember I got a call from the medical examiner because right when I was walking through the lobby of their going up to the elevators when the medical examiner called me. And he gave me the news, and I was told in the hospital that the medical examiner is going to have to check her out just because she's so young. They have to rule out any type of foul play. That's not anything with you. That's just standard. They got to do that for how
yeah.
old she is and stuff.
Wow.
So then I got a call from medical examiner, and I had been told that it looked like a pulmonary embolism. You know, during by the time I let her go, they had kind of figured she had some blood clots and stuff. Um, but then the medical examiner called me while I was in the lobby and basically confirmed all that, and he I haven't thought a lot about this phone call that I had. I've told the story a couple times, but he took his time explaining to me that it was nothing I could have done. And he told me why. And he said that he found the scar tissue from where the clot formed down in her deep leg veins. And he found where it got stuck. And he says that sucker was almost the size of a softball. Like by the time it got
Wow.
into her lungs, he says there's absolutely no way that you could have saved her. Even if you called 911 probably 20 minutes before that. He says,
Yeah.
no. So you could don't if you're feeling anything like you could have done anything differently, don't. Like that was a massive blood clot that she got. And so he was like walking me through that, like everything that he was, and I wanted to hear it all. And so then he says, and so I'm done and I'm gonna, get her put back together here and I'm gonna send her off and over to whatever funeral home we told him that we're gonna use and that kind of stuff. And so that conversation wasn't crazy long, but it was like a 5 or 10 minute conversation. And I don't remember that. I really appreciated the time that he took to like assure me and tell me in detail. Because I remember him asking me, he's like, "How much do you want to know?" And I says, "I want to know every detail you can give me. Give me everything." And so he did. He told me every little thing that he found and everything that was going to be in his report. And yeah, so that was the very next day. So then my parents had gone up the elevator to be with my kid, and I followed behind pretty quick. And by the time I got in there to tell my parents that, my mom was already having skin to skin contact with my son. And so then it was me and my dad, talking in there and chatting. And then the routine after that was like, I feel so bad for my parents. Like, what do you talk about? What do you do in that situation? I have no idea. But somehow me and my dad would get on conversations of whatever stupid videos we're finding on Instagram or, stuff, and just, trying to keep the conversation kind of lighthearted. But then over the next, I think my parents were there for probably a week or so. Um, we just started talking about all the crazy blessings that we were seeing, trying to intentionally stay really positive with it. And there were some things that we could even see, like even leading up to it, that we could look in, from a kind of a spiritual perspective, like how things played together that were very interesting and cool. And then a good friend of our family back in Utah started a GoFundMe for us during that time, and I found out about it a couple days later and was I remember I pulled that up. I was like, oh, I guess we'll look at how many people have donated to that, because that was the other thing that I was freaking out about, the money. I'd been told that it was going to cost like 3 or 4 grand a day to be in the NICU,
Hmm.
and you know, insurance is going to be in that. And then I was also told, because of the weight of my son, that we were going to qualify for Medicaid, which
Yeah.
maybe we'll talk about this later. But I never got a cent from
Oh,
Medicaid.
really? Wow.
No, I don't know what the freak happened with that. I found that out later, and I was going to have to fly down to the Social Security office, do all this stuff in person, and I just said, screw it, I'll cut my losses. And so I never got anything. We never got anything from Medicaid. Um, we should have, because I remember, a few days later, I had an appointment with somebody at the Social Security office where we walked through every question of the application for Medicaid to get my son applied for Medicaid. And then, you know, after they were done, like, all right, we have everything. We're going to submit this and get it going. So I was like, all right, cool. Leave it off. Never got submitted. They never sent the damn thing in,
Wow.
because later, months later, we're talking like 9 or 10 months later, I'm getting a couple random bills from collections in the mail because a bill was assigned in my wife's name, but my name wasn't attached to it, so I never got paid, or vice versa. Like
Yeah.
some weird
Yeah.
billing issue shit, that I had to clear up. And I just kept getting these little bills for like $500 here, $800 here, $1,200 here. I'm like, good Lord, when is this going to stop? And finally, I was like, I thought Medicaid was supposed to pick up a lot of this. Like my out of pocket max, I'm like above my out of pocket max now. What is going on? And so I called the hospital, months later. I'm like, hey, you guys have records and stuff. I'm just curious, how much did Medicaid pay in there? She's like, what's your name? Look all this stuff up. She pulls up, she's like, so your insurance was God, I think it was like Blue Cross Blue Shield or what, it doesn't matter. It's like your insurance was whatever. I was like, yeah, and she's like, and what'd you say about Medicaid? I was like, how much did Medicaid pay? She's like, we don't have any Medicaid for you. Like they didn't pay anything. I'm like, what? Why? She's like, we don't, we never got anything from Medicaid. Nobody sent anything or anything at all. We've only billed your insurance. We haven't billed Medicaid at all. So I was like, oh my freaking hell. Okay. So then I call the Texas Medicaid office and look up, and they're like, okay, what's your son's name, his date of birth, all this. And they look up and they're like, we don't have a record of anybody by that name and that's been approved or had an application for Medicaid. I was like, okay, look up my name then. Look up my wife's name. Look everything up. And they're like, we got nothing, dude. And I went and I found the paper. I'm like, I was writing all this down with application number and all this kind of stuff. So then, like, you're going to have to call Social Security office and figure that out. And I called them and they're like, obviously something got screwed up, but we can't do this over the phone. You're going to have to come in person. I'm like, I'm in freaking Utah now, guys. I'm not in Texas anymore. They're like, I'm sorry, you have to come here in person. So then I hung up and I was like, screw it. It's not worth it to deal with
Yeah.
that. But that's a whole, sorry, that was a little tangent, but I
That's
don't even
well
remember
done.
what we were originally talking about before I got on
Well,
that tangent. I'm
most,
still bitter about that.
yeah.
Can you tell?
Yeah. Well, most of us, yeah, especially when you get a preemie, that Medicaid kicks in. It's one of the things that we've talked about in some of the dad groups, um, on how we navigated that. But so let's get back to the NICU, and you literally, and most of you living the NICU dad nightmare. I mean, is really what it is. For a bunch of us, that was one of the biggest fears of is us losing our wives, you know, mom, um, and just can't imagine that. So here you are in it, and you know, especially with it happening so early in the NICU journey, like I can't imagine what that was like for you, and I'm sure everybody wants to know like what that was like having to do the NICU by yourself.
Uh, yeah. So there's a particular story about the first couple of weeks of that. Um, After my parents and people left, you know, there were still some people that were there that would come around. My in-laws stayed for longer and would be around. But for a lot of the time that I was physically in there, I was by myself, especially long term. And I don't know how long it had been since my wife had passed away, but there was some point where after that, suddenly I found myself not wanting to do kangaroo care. I wasn't doing any skin to skin. I just kept telling him no. And so I was like, you guys got it. Like he's in good hands with you professionals, you know. And they would tell me like, well, it's good for baby, it's good for you. Like I was like, dude, no, I'm good. And then you get to know the nursing staff there pretty good, especially if you're in there for a while. You know, same thing with the L&D, but now especially for the NICU, you know, being in there total 2.5 months for the whole thing, we got to know them really well. And at this point, we've probably been in there a month, maybe a little bit longer. And there was one nurse in particular, her name was Bev, and there's a couple other nurses too that were really impactful, but it's hard to pick between like who had the biggest impact. But Bev would probably take the cake for me on that one. And I've talked to her about this, and I have permission to share that. I've talked to her about it. Um, but yeah, I was just in this weird mental place where I didn't want to do skin to skin contact with my son for some reason. And after I denied her like the 10th or 15th, I don't know how many times I said no when they'd asked me, but I finally I denied her again, and Bev just come over to me and she like squatted down next to me, put her hand on my leg, and she just looked me in the eye. She says, "Wes, I'm not a widow. I don't know what you're going through, but your son needs you and you need your son. So when you're ready to put some effort into that, then you let me know." And then she got up and walked out, and like, oh, you know, I was like, oh my gosh, that slapped me in the face so hard. But she had earned the right to say that
Yeah.
because she'd been there for me through the whole process, you know, and she had focused so intently on us and built that relationship with us that I didn't want to punch her in the face when she said that. With if somebody would have just come up and said that to me out of nowhere, like that wouldn't have gone over very well, you know. But we had a relationship, and she was able to do that. And now when I go speak and I share the story, I share that story and I talk to nurses. I'm like, I want to teach you guys how to be like Bev, you know, and be able to regulate yourself so that you can take care of yourself so that you can take care of me, kind of a thing. But when she did that, I realized I took pride in myself and my own ability to figure out my own thoughts and to understand my own mind. And I realized there, I'm like, okay, something's going on here. Um, I had kind of taken a break of digging into my own head because I didn't like being in there,
Yeah.
you know, but I decided to do it again. I was like, hey, something's going on with me. Why don't I want to hold my son? And as I was meditating about it or praying about it or whatever, I kind of decided well, that's when I realized, like, you know what? I haven't had the experiences that my wife did while she was carrying him that gave her the connection that she had to him. And so I was thinking across this whole time, I'm like, this whole time I've been like disconnected in at least compared to what my wife was. And so I'm like spinning all this in my head, wondering what the hell is going on. And the best I could come up with was like, I just haven't had the experiences and I haven't had the time with those experiences to create that connection. And that's on me. That's my fault. You know, maybe not the pregnancy portion, but at least for now, like that's my fault. I need to fix that. So I need to make up for some lost time. And once that, I kind of came to terms with that in my head, I got up out of the chair and I walked over to Bev and I'm like, all right, give him to me right now, and I want to hold him as much as you'll let me. I know I'll probably cook him to death, but as long as you'll let me have him, I'll take him. You know. And so she's like, "All right, yeah, let's do it." And from then on, I held him as much as I possibly could for the next two and a half, well, probably month and a half after that point. You know. And what I after that point, I was way more involved with paying attention to him and trying to learn how to take care of him, you know. And the nurses would try here and there originally during that time, but I was so checked out that, you know, I had a hard time with that. And in fact, one thing in particular, I even shared this with a student nursing association. There was one time while my parents were still there that Vance had a Brady. You know, has those all the time. That's normal,
Yeah.
at least for the nursing staff, right? Um, but like a day or two after my wife just passed from lack of oxygen,
Mm.
then I'm sitting in this chair and my son goes into a Brady and I'm watching. And it was a little bit of a rougher one. It took him a little longer to wake up than normal. So for the first, I was like, he'll be okay, you know. And the nurse comes in there and she started, you know, shaking like, hey, let's go, buddy. And then he wasn't responding. So she like sat him up and like really started rough him up. And I, all of a sudden, I just like, I panicked. I was like, oh, I can't watch this. Like, my son's about to die or something like that. I don't know what's going on in my head. I just got up and I left. I couldn't handle being in that room when she was trying to wake him back up. And my mom was in there and she told me afterwards that that nurse had a hard time with that. She like, she felt so bad. She's like, "Oh my gosh, I can't I know the situation. Why did I do like she was like just internalizing it on herself, like
Yeah.
blaming herself." And my mom had to kind of talk her off a ledge. She's like, "No, no, like you don't understand like he's dealing with some stuff right now. That's on him. That's nothing on you. Like you do your job. Like I'll
Yeah.
go
Save
take
the
care of
baby.
him. You know, you focus on the baby, let me focus
Yeah.
on my son kind of you'll be fine." And eventually I had to go talk to the nurse, you know, a few days later until I was like, "I'm sorry. I flipped out." You know, so that's a whole other story I talk about. Like you can't internalize things for yourself. You just have to, you know, do your job and the outcomes you can't attach those to your own identity kind of a thing. But anyway, as I got focusing on my son more, I started learning more things. And I remember one of the funny things was you got to remember I'm 23 years old. I'm just getting used to freedom still at this point, you know. And I remember coming into the NICU one morning by myself and knowing the schedule. You know, they get the babies on a schedule, eating schedule. So I knew that they've just got done feeding him probably like 20 minutes ago. And walk in there, and my son's all fussing and stuff. And I'm like, hey, I think he needs a diaper change. Can I change his diaper? And they're like, well, I just barely changed him. So, I mean, we can check, but he's probably fine. And looking like, no, he's good. But he's still in there just, you know, fussing and freaking out about something. I'm like, well, I guess, do we need to feed him? They're like, no, we just fed him. If we feed him anymore, he'll probably barf. So, no, he's good. So then I remember I looked over to the nurse. I'm like, then why is he freaking out? Why is he crying? Why else would a baby cry? If his diaper's changed and he's not hungry, then what the
Yeah.
hell? You know, ignorant 23-year-old me. And she just looked at me and she's like, maybe he's just in a bad mood. And I was like, that's possible? Like, I'm like, so that was like a wake up call to me. I'm like, oh, I look back at myself and all the learning that I had to do. I was never taught anything about babies or rearing children. You know, that wasn't anything that I ever learned. And so then I was like, well, maybe how can I help him calm down? You know, can I hold? I was like, let me hold him. You know, and then I did some skin to skin contact, and he calmed down for a little bit, but then he started acting up on me too, and I'm like, bro, what is your problem? And she's like, well, maybe you can try talking to him, or give me some suggestions. And I tried talking to him, and it worked a little bit. I was like, I'm gonna try some music, and so I just pulled my phone out and I started playing different types of music. I started with like baby tunes and stuff. That
Yeah.
seemed to make it worse. And I was like, oh, good, because I hate that too. And then uh, I played some old hair band rock. That was okay. But then I eventually played Big Iron by Marty Robbins, some old gunfighter Western music, and he calmed right down. I was like, okay, all right, dude, we can gel with this. And so then, that was just like that was my first experience of learning something new about my son's personality. And then I realized I'm like, I immediately created a connection and I felt a little bit of a connection there when I learned something about my son. I'm like, oh, this is how this works. I have to learn things about my son. And the more I can learn about him and who he is, the better I'll feel connected to him. That's where I first got that idea in my head. So then my obsession became I want to learn as much as I can with him and like experiment. What is he like? What is he not like? And Then the connection and feeling like what I thought dads were supposed to feel like, then that came super fast once I started doing that. And I finally felt like, okay, maybe I am normal and I'm not broken.
Yeah.
I'm actually experiencing this.
How far down the line was that after like your wife passing?
Um, that's hard to say, but it was after my parents left and they were there for probably another week, week and a half. Um, so and then there's a few days there where I was, just not having it.
Yeah.
Probably another, I would guess probably at least another week, week and a half. So it'd probably been 2 or 3 weeks after my wife passed away, at least, maybe closer to a month when I finally kind of figured that out. And then had another whole, month and a half with him after that. But if I had to guess, it was probably about 3 weeks or so.
So, man, still can't imagine. What did you find staff treated you differently? I mean, did you find some of them were like overly nice or just avoided you? Just any differences?
Um, well, I wasn't really paying attention to them. But there was definitely a shift after my wife passed away. Like the initial shock is like, holy shit, like, nobody really knows how to handle that
Yeah.
situation. But everybody like at that time was like being overly nice, like, what can we do for you? Can we, something like that. And then we kind of get into a new normal. And then it was just now I'm primary caregiver and they're pouring into me like the same way that they were pouring into mom. Before I was back here, just kind of listening and eavesdropping kind of stuff, And every once in a while they'd be like, "Hey dad, you need to know this," or something. Like they pull me in every once in a while. I wasn't completely ignored, but I was still definitely backseat. And then after that it was totally shifted. Like I was it.
Yeah.
Parents had left, family had left. I was the only person that was gonna make sure this kid survives once we leave. So then it was a totally different story after that.
So what was, I mean, I can't imagine what that was like. I mean, from going from two to one and you basically carrying the weight of the NICU for two people, kind of, you're in your mom and dad at this point, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I can't imagine what that was like. Um, because I feel like sometimes the benefit of having mom and dad is when things are too hard, we can defer. You know what I mean? Where normal situation, you know what, wife's having a rough day. Guess what? I'm stepping up today. You know what? I'm having a rough
Yeah.
day today. Wife's gonna step up. But when you're by yourself, I mean, and it was, you still had a long time, to go. I was just, how did you carry that weight?
Bro, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like to be straight up honest with you, I didn't have a choice. Like
yeah.
I don't know.
There you go.
You know, um, geez, I don't when because there were days when I would have one of those like, dude, I'm kind of out of it today,
Yeah,
and there wasn't anybody to real take that. It was just more that was a day where I'm just more disconnected, and he's gonna spend more time in the incubator.
yeah,
You know, the nurses weren't holding him for me or anything like that. It's just he didn't get as much parent time that day.
yeah.
That's kind of what it came down to.
So you go and you hit the milestones. Obviously, they pull him off oxygen. We're doing feeding. He's growing. He's getting better. Now the science is there where we see that stress levels usually go up when we go home for dads because, everybody's counting on them. There's no more NICU staff and everything going home. So,
Yeah, it definitely happened for me too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I want to know what the prospect of going home, the closer you got to going home, what that was like for you, and especially knowing, that it was just you.
Yeah. getting closer to that day, we're watching like the whole thing became he's got to pass the car seat test, right?
Hmm.
That became the thing. And so they would get closer and they would say like we're thinking this day, and it kind of became the countdown. And I was excited. I had I'd kind of gotten used to I felt like I've actually felt like dad at this point. You know, I felt like I knew how to take care of him. I felt decently well trained. Like I think I know pretty much everything that's going on here. And so then it became exciting for me to finally take him home. Um, because a whole other piece of my grief was like the home that me and my wife were living in. We had only just barely moved into a couple of months before all this happened. It was going to be our much longer term home.
Yeah.
And so there was still shit that needed unpacked. That like my wife had this whole plan of what the house was going to be like, and so a lot of my time outside of that was um widows and they lose their spouse. There's this period of time that we go through where it's just like literally every single thing we do is to honor our spouse that we lost, and like how would they want it done, like so then the whole thing was like I'm going to decorate this house every way that my wife wanted it. I'm going to set everything up the way that she wanted it, like set up the nursery and all that kind of stuff. And ended up not even using the damn nursery by the time we got to it. But um but leading up to that point it was exciting. Where it hit, I didn't have any anxiety really about going home until it actually was in the car driving home. Then I was like, oh shit. Oh boy. Okay. I can't just be like, hey, can you like what how does I don't have anyone to ask any questions to anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then driving home, I remember I turned the mirror down and I had the little mirror set up so I could see his face, and I was freaking out that he was gonna stop breathing. Like I had like every 10 seconds I was looking, I'm like, move, you gotta move, you gotta move. Like so I'm like glancing between the mirror and the road, and the mirror and the road, mirror and the road. Like just almost having this panic attack. I'm like, prove to me that you're still alive until we get home, you know. And then I get home and I can take him out and I'm holding him and I have this pack and play set up and I get him in the pack and play. And then I took him home on the day that my in-laws were gone. Like I was completely by myself. And then getting back home and it was just silent in my house. Absolutely no noise. Because he was asleep when I put him down and
Yeah.
sitting in that chair. Then I just sat on my couch and the little bassinet section on top of his pack and play, and I'm just listening to his breathing. And I sat there and I stared at him and I listened to him breathe for probably like an hour until he like woke up. And anytime he would stir, it would like relieve my anxiety a little bit. But
Yeah.
then for those first few days, I would go through this shift of like I'm just staring at him like hope he doesn't stop breathing, and then get like so overwhelmed with the amount of anxiety and feel I'm like, oh, I can't do this anymore. I gotta like step out. I gotta grab a drink. I gotta do something. I gotta eat something, and then I'd step away from him. But then I would take the baby monitor with me. I would carry it everywhere I was going so I could hear if he made even the tiniest noise. And it just became those first few days at home were freaking rough, man. Holy cow. But the lead up to going home, it was so different. I was excited, like I was comfortable in the NICU, and I didn't really
Yeah.
I don't think I'd really realized that I wouldn't have that support once I left. I hadn't really thought about it, but then once I left, I was like, oh shit, like reality hit. And now I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing. All of a sudden, it felt like I lost everything that I learned,
Yeah.
and now I'm freaking out again.
That this is going to sound crazy, but what you're describing, it almost sounds like you were mom leaving the NICU. You know what I mean? Getting to that point, because that's a lot of moms feel that way, where they're like, "Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, baby's coming home. Like we did it, we did it." And then
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you walk out of the doors, it's the dad part where the dad's like, "Oh shit, like we're gone." Like, "Oh no," and it's the complete
Yeah.
opposite. Like it's a complete opposite feeling, and I mean, and that's where we see, that the stress levels go up because there's no backup plan or anybody to turn
No.
to. It's you and everybody's relying on you.
And one of the things that I realized out there, I was like, well, wait a minute. If I have a question, who do I call?
Yeah.
I didn't have anything. Like I didn't have like hey, here's our support line for you or something like that. Like there wasn't anything. It's like I walked out of those doors and one of the nurses followed me out there and she took a picture and that picture is now going to be the logo on the podcast that I start soon. And yeah, she took that picture and then I gave her a hug and she's like, got a little teary eyed. She's like, good luck. It's been, don't even really know what to say. And then she like, she's like getting emotional and then goes back into the hospital room. I'm like, then I standing there. I'm like, well, I guess I go home now. This is so weird, And then the whole other thing, like it was such a good day, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, just like crashed on the drive home. It wasn't in the moment when I got in the car. I was still excited, like going,
Yeah.
hitting two or three stoplights, and then I'm like, wait a minute, is he breathing? Like then I start, like it just kind of started climbing. I could feel it. Like
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, now like I'm terrified, and it was crazy. And I called my mother. I called my mom on the way home from the hospital just to like talk and like, hey, this is where we're going. Like, talk myself off of a ledge here to feel normal. And yeah, it's so weird, man.
I can't even imagine. I mean, forget the NICU. Just being a new dad, a young dad, like by
Hmm.
yourself, that's frightening to even think of just by itself. But then you're bringing home a NICU baby and the weight of all the events and the weight of the NICU and just trying to function as a normal human being.
Yeah, I think by the time we
Um,
took him home, he was like 5 pounds or something. Like he's still
mhm.
tiny.
Yeah.
He's little. His original due date was the 4th of July, and we took him home on June 15th. So it was still a couple weeks before his due date.
Okay.
You know.
Oh man, so similar. Yeah, my daughter, that was my goal to get her to leave the NICU before her due date. They told me that nobody does that, and I'm like, oh, we're gonna do it.
Yeah,
We did
watch me. Same
it.
thing. They're like, yeah, you'll probably be in there. And I was like, nah, we're gonna freaking do this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
It
yeah.
becomes a challenge. Challenge
Yeah, yeah,
accepted.
challenge accepted. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's how we roll, man. I mean, what? No kids ever gone home before their due
Don't
date?
tell me I can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, watch. So I can't, man, I can't imagine, just what that was like. But I know the stress for us, and that was with mom and dad of life after the NICU. I tell these dads, I'm like, NICU's warm up. That's pregame.
Oh
The real game
yeah.
starts when you go home. So having to play that game and play it by yourself, all the doctor's visits, therapies and that stuff. What was that like? And then also too, and you brought this up earlier, great tie-in, right? Um, your time off of work, like how are you managing life and being a NICU parent after the NICU?
Um, so luckily I had some money to fall back on because my wife, we didn't, this was the other shitty timing. Like we were in process of paperwork of getting actual life insurance done for both me and my wife when this
Mhm.
happened. So I didn't have, it wasn't all like we were in the process. They hadn't got it done yet. But through her job, she did have a little tiny supplemental life insurance through, she worked for Kroger. I think it was a year, maybe a year and a half worth of her salary. So by the time all that got processed, I got a check for like $45,000 or something like that. Not anything crazy, but I was like, okay, I can pay my rent for a few months. I can, I got
Yeah.
time to figure it out. So I at least had that buffer towards like, I'm not gonna go homeless right now, so I can at least focus on my kid. So that's a whole other thing because I know other dads are like I gotta go back to work and all this other shit that I gotta
Yeah.
balance and stuff. So that portion of it, I didn't have that because I was stay-at-home dad for a while.
Okay.
And then some family, or excuse me, I mentioned some friends had started a GoFundMe that raised a few $1,000s too to just help pay for funeral expenses. So there was a little bit of stress relief with that I'm like, okay, at least for now I don't have to worry about all of that. But there was this overarching like these bills are floating out here somewhere and they're gonna come, whatever they are. Um, so I had plenty of time where I didn't have to balance work and doctor visits and all those kind of logistics. It was just I'm just at home all day with my kid, and then I still had to do all that on my own. doctor visits whenever those were, and the therapy stuff, and doing all, still getting some tests done and all this kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And so in my situation, that was probably easier for me. I didn't find that difficult, but is because I wasn't working. I was on FMLA leave at that point. I had burned
Mm.
my 2 weeks of PTO had been burned up quite a while ago, and now I was on FMLA to just maintain my benefits while I was in there. And luckily, there was a way I could approve. I think I applied for extensions of FMLA, and they let me go up to 9 months or something like that. By the time they had to switch it over to Cobra, so yeah, I guess that's the answer. Was I didn't find that part difficult. In fact, I kind of enjoyed it because um I was looking for milestones because I was so used to milestones. In the NICU, they hit the milestones so much. They're like, once
Yeah.
you get to this weight, once you get, they got the whiteboard where they're tracking everything. And I got so used to tracking the numbers and tracking the information that when I went home, I didn't have any of that anymore. I didn't have that. So going to the doctor was refreshing for me because then I would kind of get the reassurance of like, oh, he is getting fatter. Oh, he is
Yeah.
getting, he is
Yeah.
growing, and
Yeah.
I'd get those little, okay, he's good, and bring him home. So that part, I actually enjoyed that. I liked that quite a bit. Getting out of it's an excuse to get out of the house. I didn't get out of the house for any reason, you know.
Oh yeah.
Then I had
Yeah.
all I was somebody had bought me all this dad the tactical baby gear, so I had like multicam with most like all the super masculine baby carriers in the bags, the
Yeah.
backpacks, and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, hell yeah, I'm a badass dad, kind of getting into that zone. I'm going to the doctor with that, but then this whole other dynamic of going to the doctors and the therapy place with these little babies, and everybody else in there was mom. There all these moms with these babies, and then I would walk in there with the kid, and it would always be like, "Oh, you're taking this for good, dad. Giving mom a break." And I'm like, I was just like, "Yeah, whatever," and go on. And every once in a while, if I was in kind of I don't know, a snippy mood, I'd be like, "Yeah, she's got held up at the cemetery," and then I'd keep walking. And I was kind of a jerk move to drop because then like, oh my gosh, and then it going through the doc, I'm like, that was mean. I need to go like apologize for that. But dark humor became a crutch for me during that time. I dropped a lot of dark humor jokes.
Yeah.
That was my stupid thing.
Well, and it's funny too. I mean, that's always the assumption is the assumption's always like, oh, dad's helping out mom today. Like,
Yeah. But like
oh,
good.
dad's
I got the
babysitting
term
today.
like
It's one
it's
of
so
those
good of you
things
to
where
babysit today. I'm like, babysit? This
yeah,
is my
yeah,
kid. What are you talking about?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So you went through all that. Um, and how long was it just you and Vance, right? Vance?
Yeah. Um, it's kind of weird because I mentioned my in-laws were hanging out around, so they would come and go quite a lot through that whole process. But I brought him home June 15th, and it wasn't very long. I was only at that home for a couple of weeks until I decided I was like, I need more help. I need more support, and all my
Uh-huh.
family's back in Utah. All the people that can offer the level of support that I need are back there. So I got to pack up my crap and move. So then that became a whole other ordeal. My landlady at the time, Robin, shout out to her. She's a good friend of mine still. She was a saint during that time. She's like, "Oh yeah, don't worry about like canceling your lease early. Like this situation's nuts." She worked with us on that, and she even sent her. I even think she sent her son over to help us pack and stuff, and some other people from the church. Our church home were bringing us meals, bringing me food and stuff, which was nice most of the time. But I do remember getting sick of homemade food, and I just wanted a freaking burger.
Yeah.
So sometimes I just go get something. But yeah, then the whole thing was figuring out, all right, I got to move and all the logistics of that within a couple of weeks. And we moved back. My parents came down. Um, they flew down again and packed up my wife's car and my truck and a U-Haul, and we drove from Dallas up to near Salt Lake across 4th of July. I think we spent the night in Albuquerque on the way home. And then it was Now I'm moving back in with my parents. That was a whole other like thing I had to sort through in my head,
Yeah.
because that was where I lived when I was in high school, and I moved back into my old bedroom from high school. And now all of a sudden, if I want to go do something, I have to ask my mother permission again because she has to watch my kid if I go do this.
Yeah.
Or, so that was a whole other battle with my self-worth in that I, kind of got kicked all the way back to square one again. Had to work through some therapy with some of that too. Not that my parents are freaking amazing. Love my parents to death, but just the situation, like I had a hard time with it. Um, but then being alone with my sons between in Texas and then moving back in with my parents. I mean, God, that was a couple months like that. And I would just hang out in the basement, just me and him, and my everybody else would be upstairs.
Wow. So let's fast forward. Things obviously changed. Things got better.
Yeah.
He grew. Life moved on. And so you get to, I mean, let's fast forward it to now. And just kind of looking back on that experience, where did you, I mean, knowing you now and what you're doing now, where was the shift um where you were like, okay, I need to do something? Like, where did that happen for you and how?
So a couple years ago, um, this is can we get a little bit spiritual here? Because this is a little bit of a spiritual conversation. I know
Okay.
maybe some people listening to this might not be active Christians like I am or something like that, but that's a piece of this story, so I'm going to share it. Um, always been a big believer. I mean, you can see in the back, I got a big old painting of Jesus behind me. That's my life. But so at the time, I was living in Twilla. Well, we still live here in Twilla, Utah, and at the church I go to, I was one of the youth group leaders for like 16 to 18-year-olds, and we had a youth group night on a weeknight, and I was coming home from that, and I had a similar experience happen while I was driving home to something that I had had a couple times previously. Um, Before Lauren passed away, I remember getting this feeling like weigh on me one night that I just felt like something really hard was about to happen. Like I got some type of a heads up about that. I can't really describe that. I remember talking to Lauren about that, and I'm like, something, I don't know what it is. I just feel like this. I just got this feeling out of nowhere, and I can't shake it. And she's like, well, as long as we're together, whatever it is, we'll get through it. And then that's what it was. It was us not being together anymore. So that sucked. And then I got another one when I was dating my wife that I'm married to now. Before a bunch of other dramatic stuff happened with that whole journey. That could be a whole other podcast episode in of itself. Um, but I got another one during that time that something hard was coming. I remember telling Kearsley, my wife, about that, and she already knew that all of these other stories. I told her, and so I was like, "Hey, I got another one. Something's coming down," and then all that stuff blew up. So then at this time, coming home from this church activity, I get another one, but it was a little different this time. It was not a something really hard's coming. It was more like a I need to be doing something, but I have no idea what it is. I have no clue what that is. And it was more like a feeling like, hey, you're gonna need to do something that you're not ready for right now, and you need to kick it into gear. But I had no idea what that meant. But that's just the overwhelming feeling that I got. So I got home and I came in and told my wife Kearsley, I says, hey, do you remember those other experiences? She's like, did you have another one? Like, what's gonna happen now? I was like, it's a little different, but I don't really know what this means, but I think maybe we need to kick it into gear with like praying and reading scripture together and that kind of stuff. So we're like, all right, cool, let's do it. And um, then for the next 10 months, that experience just kept pulling on me. I didn't know what it was, but I wasn't really trying to figure it out either. I was more just pondering about that, and it got worse and worse and worse over time. About 10 months later, so that experience was probably February or March of 2024, and then uh, the first couple weeks of January 2025 last year was. I got fed up with that. And I was like, dude, I cannot figure out what this is and it won't leave and it's getting worse. And I finally went and talked to my own mother about this. And she had kind of been feeling some similar things herself too, as well, which is interesting. But anyway, through our conversations, it finally hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, I need to, the words that came to my mind was like, I need to be a speaker. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. What? What do I need to share this story? Like, how do I even do that? I only knew one person that did that, and his name's Chad Hymas, and he's a quadriplegic in a wheelchair. He's in the National Speakers Association Hall of Fame. Dude's traveled the world as a motivational speaker because he grew up in the same farming town that I grew up, a little town called Rush Valley, and he had a 1-ton bale of hay fall on his neck off a tractor and break his neck and paralyze him. And now fast forward 20 something years later, that's what he does, and he's really successful at it. So I knew him. I was like, he's the only guy I can talk to. So I texted him, and he had reached out during all this crazy stuff that happened with Lauren too. So I had his number, and so I tell him, I'm like, dude, I just kind of had this experience and I don't know really what to do about it. And so he invited me out to his house a few days later to chat. And I just kind of gave him the whole, like, this is where I'm at. I don't know what to do with this. So he gave me a couple people I needed to talk to, told me to go do this and this and this. I think probably he's like, let's see what he does with this kind of a thing. And I was like, I don't know what, you just point me in a direction and I will sprint as fast as I can in that direction because I feel like this is what I need to do. I just have no idea what that looks like.
Yeah.
So for a year, I wrote a book, of that whole, like, what I learned after that whole process and published that. Never thought I would write a book, but here I am. My face is on the cover of it. That's weird. And I got that out and then I wrote the book. I'm like, okay, now what? I wrote a book. Now what do I do? And then I got into speaking with schools and universities, and I had a connection to a girl that I went to school with. Her husband was the president of a student association out in Tennessee at a Lincoln Memorial University. So Lincoln Memorial University hired me to come out and speak to all these veterinary science students, and I just started sharing the story, but in a way of like, how do you create success the way that you want it to look when you're faced with this? You feel like you're on the edge of a cliff of all this uncertainty, right? And how do you handle all the anxiety with that? And so that's what they wanted me to share. And that's what I started with, of like talking in schools, like kids graduating high school, doing graduation speeches and stuff. But it's still like, I feel like I was getting closer, but I'm like, there's still
Yeah.
something that's not quite there. This is closer. I'm on the right track though. But figuring it out was rough until about a year after my initial conversation with Chad. I hit him up again because I'm like, I'm still feeling this. I'm like, there's something else, and I'm also not getting as much traction as I want to. So he invites me out to his house again, and we sit down and have a conversation. And I was like, he's like, do you want to do this full time? And I'm like, I would. That would be the greatest thing in the world to do this full time. I just have no idea how or what that looks like. So we kind of did this little like, well, how much money do we need to make? And this kind of thing. What realistically would it take? And all this kind of stuff, and kind of laid out. So we had an idea, and then he's like, "Okay, well, let's talk about how we're gonna get there." And then he can't write anything, so he's telling me what to write. And so he writes, he's like, "Write down healthcare." I'm like, "Okay, I write down healthcare." And then he's like, "You've got a book, you've got this, you got this, you got this, you got so much more going for you than I did when I first started speaking. I didn't have any of that. And the only reason that your story's not getting out there more is because you're not pushing it." And that was, I kind of needed to hear that.
Yeah.
Maybe I was expecting it to come to me a little bit too much. And then he says, "Why are you not speaking in healthcare?" I'm like, "Dude, I don't know." He's like, "You're like, duh." Was kind of like, "Hello, like you should be booked solid sharing the story and finding ways to help people with this in some type of healthcare space. I don't know what that would look like, but you should pursue that." So then after that, I come home and it was after dark, and I'm like, all right, I guess I'm gonna get on LinkedIn. And I looked up some NICU professionals group and messaged a couple people about that. Deb DeSenza, I started sending her some messages, and she's like, "You should go look up this dude named Alex." I was like, "All right, cool, I'll do that." This was, I don't know, however many, a couple months ago that we got connected. So
Yeah.
then I found you did the NICU Dad podcast. I was like, oh heck yeah, let's do this. And that was the very first start of that. And then I started reaching out to all these different people in the NICU space that are doing like the NICU Parent Network, and got in
Yeah.
touch with some people there and all these other, organizations that are doing stuff like that. So I started getting connected with that, with people interested in having me share my story from more type of ambassadorship or kind of thing. And then more recently, it's taken off where uh, it kind of blended what I was doing with the universities and into healthcare, and now it's getting into nursing schools at the moment, where some people that had heard me speak to university students that were getting ready to graduate about how do you handle the anxiety of the uncertainty of the future and all that kind of stuff, and they're like, this is, you could tweak this really good for nursing students, and we would like you to come speak to the Utah Student Nurses Association. And so I just did that um, a little while ago and developed this drive better care framework out of the framework that I teach in the book, but I just kind of tweaked it for nursing students and how they could emotionally reset between some hard moments. And I shifted, instead of focusing on the story of the loss and all of that and how I kind of overhauled my life after that, shifted it instead to talk about Bev and how Bev absolutely changed my life, because it was in the NICU that I was on this downward mental health spiral, bro. I was going down the
Yeah.
toilet, and she was the one that kind of did that, slap in the face with me moment, and that was the pivot point where I started to come back up. I was still way
Yeah.
down here, but because of her and a couple of the other NICU nurses that were there for me, I made a pivot there so that by the time I left the NICU, I was at least going up. And then I was able to continue that trajectory coming up. So I share that story as like the emotional connection. And I share that with the student nurses there. And, everybody's all teary eyed and wiping their eyes about the story. And then I share, like, hey, I want you to be like Bev. But if you're going to be like Bev, you got to have your stuff together, right? Because when you help us dads, and I did some advocacy for dads too in there, because I was like, you guys need to talk to dads when you're in this, because nobody asks us any questions.
Yeah.
And so then it's all like, you got to take care of yourself so that you can take care of us, so you can be like Bev. So that kind of became their little motto, is like, be like Bev. And now I'm working with Utah State University, developing like that. Dude, that's going to be cool. I'm in conversations with helping them to develop this new mental health initiative for their entire nursing department, because I just had a phone call with the interim department head of their nursing department and one of their full-time professors in the nursing department yesterday, where they told me, they said, we really want to use this. This is freaking amazing. And some of the students that we have in our program that went and saw it recommended this. But the our university supplies new nurses essentially to a whole bunch of different hospitals and hospice centers, all these other medical caregiving roles around the state. And we've been getting some feedback apparently that in recent years burnout has been going up, and attrition rate, just the whole emotional overwhelm and
Oh
resilience,
yeah.
or however they wanted to describe that, was getting worse. And they were coming to the university like, you guys need to either prepare them better or something like this. And there's a whole other conversation, like the systemic issues that need to be addressed and staffing
Yeah.
issues,
Yeah.
all this other stuff. So I'm not saying that doesn't have anything to do with it, and they're not doing either. They're like, we're working on that, but can you at least, like, can you do something with the nurses to get them a little bit better prepared while we work on all this other crap we got to work on? So then they come to me after this and they're like, we think you could help with this. And so now we're developing this whole thing where they're going to have me come do some keynotes for the third semester nursing students every semester and do tracking with some assessments. And so now a good buddy of mine, Jason, who was my therapist during all of that, got him looped in with this on doing some assessments for all the nurses and developing all this. And so now it's super cool. Now I'm talking with a couple other universities. There's one in New Jersey I'm talking to about doing it too now. Like it's finally, it's rolling. It's like we finally found it's super fulfilling to me, because it feels like I can actually give back to the kind of people that changed my life,
Yeah.
in,
The
in a
best.
super, super cool way. It's like, oh my gosh, it's so fulfilling. Like, I can't afford it to do it for free, but if I could, I would.
Yeah.
Like, it's so much, it's so, so cool. And to finally find a lane where, like, these people not only need what I can offer, they really want it, and it actually changes lives. Whereas I would go to university and, yeah, I'd share my story and they would get it, it would be impactful, but not quite as much as when you go talk to the people that actually like, they can put themselves in that scenario on the other side. I
Yeah.
say, like, this is my experience as a dad. as a NICU dad and how these people changed my life and what you guys can do to replicate that and the whole thing. So I have no idea where this is going to ultimately go. This is just recent things that have been happening in the past few weeks, but whatever it is, dude, I'm so excited for it.
That's awesome,
It's
man.
going to
I
be
mean,
awesome.
talk about a success story. I mean, can we say that and it's so great because it's creating more Debs or more Bevs, sorry. Um
Well,
and that
Deb's pretty cool too.
yeah, I know. Did you put Deb in my head and I've actually been messaging with her this week. But
That's funny.
creating those Bevs and because that what if moment, like what if she wouldn't have approached you that day?
Hmm.
Like who's to say? I mean, where things could have
I
gone
don't
and
know, man. I've thought of that too. I'm like,
yeah,
if the nurses would have just like not really ignored me, been like, but been like, I don't know how to handle him, so I'm just gonna kind of avoid. If they took the avoidance route,
yeah,
I don't know,
yeah,
dude.
yeah. And see, I love that you're doing this at that level because I was just at a conference today and talking about this, and I'm trying to get these people to understand like the ripple effect. Like it's almost unmeasurable in the fact of just her having that conversation with you.
Hmm.
Just them addressing these dads in a certain way. The ripple
It's
effect
simple,
is
dude.
huge, and it's huge. All you're doing is acknowledging somebody
Yeah.
or trying or you just try to understand what they're going through.
And you know what
And
I've also realized is that it's not like they're doing it intentionally either.
yeah, yeah,
Like
no.
like they're not
Yeah,
intentionally ignoring dads. Like screw that guy, I don't want to talk to him. It's just like
yeah,
just something about our culture has just put dads on the back seat,
yeah,
and dads have been trained to be comfortable in the back seat, and everybody's been trained to be comfortable with dads being in the back seat,
yeah,
and it's just normal, and it's
yeah.
got to change.
Yeah, and I mean and that's why we're here. I mean, it's literally these dads are underutilized and they're I will say this forever. They're the champions of the NICU because there's so many situations where we're the contact person. We're the first ones in the NICU usually. We're the first ones dealing with the baby because
Hmm.
I mean, for a lot of us, mom's recovering,
Yeah.
from a C-section and, for me, my wife was in a completely different hospital. And so, we're first contact, but we're an essential part on when you look at family-centered care and the care team, it and it goes on levels of everything. Like, they talk about wanting to improve the rates of breastfeeding and things like this where, it's a team. And if you have dad educated on NICU stuff, on this, on the benefits of these different things, dad's your biggest influencer for mom.
Yeah.
So when mom wants to throw in the towel and she's like, I'm tired, I can't do this anymore, dad's the one that's going to decide how that goes. Like, dad's the one
Hmm.
that's going to be like, hey, I know it's tough, but I need you to pump because this baby needs that milk, that colostrum. Like, it's gold.
Yeah.
Whereas if the dad didn't know that and didn't know to go that route, that conversation goes completely different because then it becomes, she's like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And he's like, okay, I got you. Like, let's just make things easier on you. That's fine. We don't need to worry about this anymore. And then that gets taken off the table. And so, you know, dad's the biggest influencer. They're the one, we're sleeping in the same bed, we're riding in the same car, so we have, there's a huge effect that we can have. And things are always easier
I
when you're
think
on.
dads are the ones that are holding it all together for the whole
Yeah.
family. You
Yeah,
know,
for sure. For sure.
they're
Absolutely.
comfortable leading from the back, but they're still leading from the back.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a silent. Yeah, I mean, it's a silent leading and, holding everything together and then continuing after the baby goes home. But so normally I ask everybody, you know, the generic question around this part, where, what advice do you have for current NICU dads? Um, so I have that, but with your situation, and it's something I don't know about, when we see the mortality rates, you know, moms passing, that's all we hear about right now. That's a hot topic on these numbers. I know you and I have talked about it, but I think what gets left off to the side is if these rates are that high that everybody's super concerned, well, then that means there's a giant group of widowed dads.
Yep.
You know,
Nobody talks about them.
nobody talks about them at all. I mean, for the most part, we don't even know that they exist. It's not something I thought about. It's for me, it was the worst case scenario. And then
Hmm.
us hooking up, I'm like, okay, holy crap, like it's a thing. And then,
Yeah.
it got me to thinking about that we're talking about right now. What advice would you have? Because it's something now. I mean, the conversation needs to be had, but what advice do you have for those dads? Like your biggest takeaway, especially the ones in the NICU.
Give me a second.
No, no, you're good. Take your time. And more, I guess, even to the point is there anything that you would have done differently at any point?
That is a whole other question in there.
Yeah.
Well, you got to go back to the experience that changed it all for me. Like every dad has to have that experience. So I guess that goes kind of hand in hand with what I would have done differently, knowing what I know now. I would have been, well, I mean, we even mentioned like, God forbid if my child that my wife's pregnant with right now ends up in the NICU, I'm going to be doing skin to skin a lot more. We're going to be equal partners in that and not just me like, mom's got it and kind of sit in the back seat like I was talking about. So in the NICU, I would be way more involved with that. I would be intentionally trying to learn more about my kid because that's ultimately what I learned. What made the difference for me was that I needed to learn my kid and I need to learn my kid's personality, learn what they liked, what they didn't like. That's what changed it all for me. And I mean, God forbid if Bev had never done that for me, I don't know if I would have got to that point on my own. I would like to think I would, but who knows?
Yeah.
You know.
Or how long it would have taken.
So or exactly, yeah. I don't know. Jeez, I like to think about that. Um, so yeah, the biggest advice to any NICU dad is like you gotta, you know, put in there. You'll you'll get out of it what you put into it, I guess, kind of a thing. But then for the guys that end up in the same boat as me, and I've even heard of a couple of them recently, and I know they're just not in a place to talk to anybody. Um, this gets a little bit into advice towards widowed dads in general, also. But one of the things that I was absolutely most terrified of immediately upon her death, one of the things that was screaming through my head when I was laying on the master bathroom floor, just crying my eyes out, was that my son didn't have a mom. I am not made to be mom. I cannot be mom. What is that going to look like? And to not let yourself feel guilty for thinking that.
Yeah.
Because here's another statistic that not a lot of people talk about. This is just widowed dads in general, not necessarily from maternal mortality, although they obviously fit into this bucket as well. But the statistics of widowed dads with kids under 18 that are in another committed relationship or remarried within 24 months is about 61%. That's
Wow.
well over half. You flip that to widows, to the ladies when they lose their spouse, you know what the rates are at 24 months? It was like less than 30. I can't remember exactly what the number was, but it was much, much lower. So dads do not do good alone.
Yeah.
They're not made to be alone. It doesn't work that way. We need someone to fight for. It's our kids and also our spouse. And we are also not natural nurturers, right? That's a skill we can learn to an extent that I had to learn to an extent, but still there's a difference between mom and dad as far as that's concerned, you
Yeah.
know. And baby needs both mom and dad. And I will stand on the top of the rooftop and say that no man should be a single dad and no mom should be a single mom. Like we need solid families, you know. So maybe I need to slow down a little bit because I'm getting like amped up about that. But any dad that goes through what I'm dealing with is eventually, probably sooner than he feels comfortable with thinking about it, those thoughts are going to be going through his head. And the first thing is he needs to not feel like there's something wrong with him for thinking that.
Yeah.
But then just in general for any dads, like you gotta put in to your kid, learn more about them and so that you can get that connection. So if that's another thing that you're struggling with, like you don't have the connection that you want with your kid, it's because you haven't got the experiences that bring that connection, right? You have to get those experiences with your son or with your kid to do that. In my case, was my son. So I guess those two kinds of things together. Um, but then that doesn't really help. Of like, okay, I shouldn't feel guilty about having those thoughts, but now what? Like, what do I even do? You know, that's just making me feel better. I'm like, well, there's a lot of if you have family support, you got to lean on them. You got to lean on whatever support you can because there's no way you can handle that on your own. Um, but then I'm getting into my whole like coaching widowed dads. I run a Facebook group for widowed dads where we talk about building chapter two, and I walk them through like when they're ready to start doing that, and then I'm getting into those kind of conversations. But
Yeah. No,
there's
that's
I wish that there was something specifically for widowed dads, and maybe there is, and I'm just not aware of it, that walks them through all of the logistics that they have to figure out. Because if I could have just hired an executive assistant to go like, here's all of the shit that you have to take care of. All of the life insurance stuff, all the death certificate stuff, all this extra stuff on top of all of the NICU stuff and on top of all of that kind of stuff that could just handle all that or at least walk me through doing that. Because I had to figure that out on my own with the help of like my mom and some other people also trying to figure it out. Like there's so much stuff that needs done. I think there are more resources out there now. Um, but it ultimately came down to just asking for help. It made it so much easier when I'd actually ask for help. I think there goes my camera again. Let me wake that up.
it. Well, and I mean, and I guess the other part is letting how far you usually have to go before you ask for help. Sometimes we wait too long, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's one of those things, and it ends up making things a little
Luckily,
bit worse.
in my situation, I got pretty comfortable asking for help because I was so busted at that point. I'm like, dude,
Yeah,
I don't even know what to make for dinner. Can somebody tell me what to make for dinner? Like, just ask. I was asking everybody for everything, which was good for a while. Eventually I started putting my big boy bands on and figuring some stuff out on my own. But that was there were some people that had to convince me that asking for help was okay. And once I got to that point, then things were a little bit better. That I had some support that could lean on and help with some things. Because in that sense, like even changing another diaper seems like way too much. You know, just dealing with everything in my head.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's what I describe. We're walking around with these bags, and it's a weight that you're carrying, and so normal things sometimes aren't normal because of that weight that you're carrying, and whether it's in your head or in your heart. You know what I mean? It's a heavy weight nonetheless, right? Like
Yeah.
it's and it's all unimaginable. Um, dude, I think we're almost at 2.5 hours. That's pretty cool. So what all do you have? Let's promote your stuff, man. So what is that widowed dads group on Facebook? What's that called?
It's called Widowed Dads Building Chapter 2.
And what's the name of your
Right now
book?
there's about 150 guys in there now, so
Oh, okay, so
and
that's growing.
that's yeah, it's growing and I only started it maybe 6 weeks ago. Not even that,
Seriously.
probably a month ago. And
Wow.
yeah, there's 150 guys in there now. And because here's the other thing was and maybe this goes kind of along with the advice for the for the dads in that situation was I immediately started looking for what support is there for widowers. Specifically, what support is there for young widowers? And guess what I found?
Nothing.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So the only things at that time, and it's better now. You know, there's guys like Charles that's doing the 4 Care, 4 Moms kind of thing that has
Hmm.
something for dads. There's a couple other foundations out there that are doing some work, so it's better now than it used to be. But in 2019, when I was looking, there none of this existed at all. The only thing that I found was like I think it was called the Widower Support Network, but it was a whole bunch of older guys that lost their wife, in their geriatric years, and it was just like,
Yeah.
how do we become comfortable being alone, kind of a thing. I'm like, I don't relate with that at all. And then all of the other widows support was was for widows, was for women, and I didn't really feel like I belonged in those groups either or anything like
Yeah.
that. So I felt completely out on an island by myself. I was like, there has never been anybody in the history of mankind that has experienced what I'm experiencing because I can't find anything on it anywhere.
Yeah.
Nowhere. I found a couple of articles written with somebody's story from forever ago, but nobody was talking about it. So I felt very, very, very alone with that. Um, so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to start the group was like, I know there's more out there now, but then I got involved in widows and widowers. There was a bunch of groups for widows and widowers kind of together that I would spend some time in. But eventually, once I met Kirsten, I got remarried, started having more kids, and I kind of exited that space where I needed, the grief support kind of a thing. I was like, I
Yeah.
feel like I kind of
Yeah.
graduated from this emotional, just wallowing in my own self pity kind of stuff, and got to a point where I was like, I don't really like hanging out in those groups anymore. But then when all this kind of happens, I'm like, I got to do more with this. I decided to step back into it. Like, hey, what does the space look like now? And I find it's a little bit better, but there's still nothing specifically for widowed dads anywhere that I could find. No group support, no anything like that. There's the widows, the older widowers, still the same thing. There's a couple groups for extremely young widows and widowers now. That's a little bit better. So that is better, but nothing specifically for the dads. So it's like, all right, I guess I got to make a group for that because what I wanted at that time was I wanted a group specifically of young dudes that got widowed that still had kids. Ideally, if they were still in their 20s, that would be cool too because I was 23, 24 when it happened. But whatever, if they at least still have kids, I'd feel way more a part of that. And that didn't exist. So I was like, I guess I'm gonna make it. And I feel really passionate about not sitting in your self pity for too
Yeah.
long. And what your life is gonna look like is what you're gonna make of it. So there comes a point where you got to start doing some uncomfortable things to make that happen. And I want to help the guys walk through that stuff, at least from my experience, and be able to talk to them. So next month, well, actually this month, at the end of this month, the last Monday of every month, we're going to be doing a little virtual support group following your model, you know? And I was
Yeah.
like, we're gonna. So I've been doing this stuff with I love you, bro. Doing the local mental health support groups for men here in my town. That's a shout out if you're listening in Utah, men's mental health for I love you, bro meetings. You should find one. So I've been doing that and running a support group for that. Got really comfortable with that. And then, meet up with you, find the NICU Dad huddle. I'm like, ooh, that's really cool. It's a little different. So now I'm like, we handle this I love you, bro meeting the structure that we use is really, really good. I like how he does this huddle here. So I'm like kind of bringing the two together
There
and
you
doing
go.
something for widowed dads that's going to start at the end of the month. And we'll see where that goes.
Yeah.
If have some guys in there that need to share some things. And then, I mentioned Chad. He owns this place called Royal Creek Ranches, and he's like, "So when are you gonna put on a retreat for widowed dads?" And I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
"I don't know. I guess maybe we ought to think of that." So now that's in the works where we're designing something like that. So there's gonna be some cool stuff coming up. I just don't know when. There's a lot. I still have a day job. You and I still go fix stuff and install
Yeah. Hey,
stuff
we're
during the
AC
day.
guys too. That's the other part. We're HVAC guys. That was all there. I mean, it was destined for us to link up. And I laugh, when you describe that situation because that's exactly what I went through. Is I got asked to host a dad's group at the hospital, and I'm like, cool, man. Yes, I'm absolutely gonna do it. And I'm like, I'm gonna go and do some research, and there was nothing. This was
Nothing.
2017, I think, and this was 2017, so there was no NICU Dad stuff out there other than mentions. Somebody would do one of the organizations would do a story or something during Father's Day. And so that's what you would find online. But no, man, I love it. And I think, there's obviously a need. And that's what that's where I think the real calling is when you go and look up something that you're in this group and there's nothing, that's a message. You know what I mean? That's where and that's where
Yeah, you found a vacuum, you need to fill
yeah,
it.
you're like, there's no going back. Once you do that search and you find that there's nothing, it does
And
something
you're
to
like,
you because you're like, wait a minute, no, I'm this guy. And then the math doesn't math because you're like, oh, okay, wait, no, I know that there's this many people that are experiencing this. And then when you start looking at it that way, and then you're like, holy crap. And then you create a group and to have that many people in there right now in such a short time, you know,
yeah.
that's awesome. And I think I had one, we have the NICU Dad group. It's a private Facebook group and I've had it for years, but now I'm going back to using it and we're promoting it now to really be a resource to share stuff because I'm like, okay, even dads in the huddle, I'm like, okay, well, I'm only seeing them once a month when they're on there, if they're on there, if they
Yeah.
repeat and come on there. And the huddle, man, I love it. It's not something I had talked about doing it, but now that we're doing it and it's the last Tuesday of every month, the NICU Dad huddle. Um, I can't believe what I've gotten. See, and I'm really excited for you doing that one because I really feel like almost it's a more for me. There's so much that I learned that I didn't know, and I mean it's just huge. And man, the stuff that these guys share, it's like nothing else, man. And I can't describe it, and it works because we walk the walk, but yeah, I'm super excited for you, man. I'm loving everything that you're doing, and I can't wait to see where this goes. Um, it's yeah, and then
Yeah,
podcast
I'm
in the
like,
works. I mean, I'm not
there's
gonna
another
make you
thing.
commit to everything, but I know
I know.
we have these
Well, so
projects.
I've made it. I've made it on the RSS thing that you
Yeah,
sent me
yeah,
there, and I come up with the name, I come up with the logo. I'm like, all right, I have to make this because I want there to be a podcast specifically for widowed dads.
yeah.
There's a couple of those out there. A guy that I've gotten acquainted with, his name's Matthew. He runs the Solo Dad podcast. Um, but I wanted one. I was like, I wanted it to bridge both support for the dads, but then also bring in more like systemic awareness for the whole because maternal mortality is such a conversation in healthcare right now, and because they're like the rates of it in the US versus the EU are so different, like what the heck's
Yeah.
going on in the
Oh
US,
yeah.
and then the whole like the African American women and their rates are so much higher than other. Like, why is it like that? That's all. The whole thing like is going conversation, and like what you mentioned, I would have a call with you, and then I had a call with a couple other people that are involved in that conversation. I would just ask them like, so who's this is awesome. We obviously need to focus on mom and baby and get those rates down. No duh. That's like priority number one. But when we do have it, who's picking up the dad on the other end of that? And every single person I asked that question was like, dude, I haven't even considered that. Like, it's not even a thought that ever crossed my mind. And I'm not shaming them. I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
I'm
No,
seven
no.
years out and I never even thought of it either, dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's how just baked into our culture it is. We just don't talk about it. And the dads going through it don't talk about it.
Yeah.
They completely recluse into I just need to figure my shit out and my little circle and shut everything out and just take care of my kid or take care of my kids or whatever, and that's what they do. And that's what we've been trained to do, just handle our own business. So men's mental health in general is a struggle to
Yeah.
get guys to talk about. But then when I would drop that, I'm like, okay, there's a conversation that needs to be happening. And so then I bring it up with you and you're like, you need to do a podcast about that. I'm like, God, another
You-
thing. Yeah, you're
That would
probably
touch
right. Yeah,
me.
I need to do that. And so then I come up with the name. I'm like, all right, we're gonna do Dad's Left Behind, widowed dads. God, I can't even remember the subtitle. I came up with something about widowed dads of maternal mortality and building chapter two, something like that. Something around those like advocating for those dads. Oh, supporting widowed dads building chapter two is what it was. Dads Left Behind. And so I'm like, I'm gonna talk about those. And we're going to talk about maternal mortality and bring that up, and this whole thing where we don't talk about these dads, and we need to bring more awareness to it. And yeah, well, now it's out there. It's on air now, so it's got to happen.
I'm telling you, man, these widow dads, they listen to podcasts. And I will tell you this, being on the other side, um, when hear a dad saying, "Man, I listened to your podcast and listened to your episodes while I was in the NICU. It got me through the NICU." Um, it's uh, it's powerful, you
I was
know. And
actually
then
going to look up the name because I think I still screwed up the name. What did I
it,
even name it? I
yeah,
liked what I came up with, but now I
yeah,
can't
and
remember
I
how I
mean, you'll
wrote it.
see, and then I mean that's how we touch the most, and obviously the podcast world is, you know, we all listen to them, but
Yeah, yeah.
I,
Now I got it
I
right. Dads Left Behind, Supporting Widow Dads Building Chapter 2. And then I have well, you can't even really see it, but the picture that's gonna be blurry as hell. Never mind, you can't
yeah,
see that. But the picture of the picture that nurse took of me coming out of the hospital was just me standing there with the little car seat, and I just kind of took the silhouette out of that and put Dad's Left Behind right underneath it. And I was surprised when that came out. I'm like, that looks pretty cool. I like
yeah,
that, and we're gonna have to do that. So what I want to do with that podcast is obviously talk with some widowed dads that are going through it, right? Get their story, what's going on. How did you figure that out? Go through that whole journey, but then talk about the people that are supporting those people, the maybe the therapists that are working with them. Like, what are these guys dealing with? And then have the maternal mortality conversation, and the dads on the other end of that, and talk to people that are more in that type of conversation. How can we help those dads and try to cover a few different bases at some point within that podcast if I can balance that well enough.
yeah.
Who
Oh
knows
man,
where that'll go, but
yeah, and there's so many levels, so many things. You know, even yeah, it's I mean it's a mirrored space almost to just the NICU dads within themselves, and you know all the subjects that I'm talking about now. I mean, we're talking about therapy, EMDR therapy, changed my life.
yeah.
You know, there's so much, but sky's the limit, brother. And man, I'm really excited for you, and it's a hell of a story. I I find myself saying it more to folks because it's unimaginable, but I think it might be more common than we care to think. And
Yeah.
you know,
Because if you think about that, if we're talking about maternal mortality, going into the NICU means there was a complication of some sort, most,
yeah,
right? Like, I don't know if there's any rates on that, like how often that a baby's in the NICU is because there's some type of complication with mom, preeclampsia,
yeah,
incompetence, or whatever it is, right?
yeah,
There's a C-section that has to happen usually, something like that. So now mom is inherently way higher risk of becoming the wrong side of that maternal mortality statistic because of whatever happened to get the baby in the NICU. So the chances that a NICU dad is going to also be a widowed NICU dad is higher than just a normal dad,
yeah,
right? I mean, if we're just thinking logically here.
yeah,
So I'm not the only one.
no,
And I know personally there's a couple guys that have joined my group that had they got the real nightmare one
mm,
where they lost mom and baby,
oh yeah,
and now like they don't get the whole NICU experience because they got it for a couple of days and then baby didn't make it and mom didn't survive delivery and they walk out of the hospital alone.
yeah,
Like that's my nightmare. I'm like, dude, I can't imagine that. At least I had my kid. Like if I would have lost my kid, would I have even still be here? I might have ended it if that was the case. I don't
yeah,
know. So there's dads there's always they're out there,
yeah.
and we gotta do something, man.
I think that's a perfect way to end it. And appreciate you, everybody. Look for Wes Brandon,
Yeah.
doing amazing things.
WestonBrandon.com is where you'll find everything.
Yeah, and we'll keep an eye out for that podcast. I'll keep promoting all your stuff, and as always, folks, the NICU Dad, look for us on all the socials, and the NICU Dad podcast is back. All right, thanks, man. All right, stop recording.